The story begins with the story of how the world once belonged to a game called Deus Ex Machina, shortened to Ragnarok, or Demrock. It instantly became a worldwide hit, winning the Game of the Year title and setting new records in the VR market. At its peak, it had over 100 million players simultaneously, fighting for glory in a world of monsters and magic. But even the greatest legends fade with time. Years passed, and online traffic began to decline as people switched to newer releases. And so, support for the game was finally coming to an end. Several old-timers gathered around the campfire for a final farewell. A system message popped up, announcing that the server would be shutting down permanently in just 30 minutes. Player Kaiser peered into the night. Even being number 1 in the rankings, he seemed quite calm about everything that was happening. The player in 5th place, the massive Purple Taste, grumbled that the game was a piece of trash anyway. He wanted it to fail, but seeing it happen in real life felt quite different. The Sword Emperor, the 4th-ranked player with the long ponytail, sighed heavily. He loved the game, but he couldn't understand why such a magnificent project was dying. Kukureku, a woman in a golden mask, interrupted the conversation from the sidelines, saying she was shocked the game hadn't died sooner. Purple Taste muttered something sarcastic about her mask off camera. The girl immediately snapped back, and the Sword Emperor sighed heavily, and he told them to stop because all these idiots knew how to do was bark like dogs. While Kaiser simply watched their squabble for the last time, the Sword Emperor looked at the silent leader of their group, and Kaiser admitted it was a bit sad to see it all end. Purple Taste laughed. Of all the people present, Kaiser was the one studying game mechanics as if his life depended on it. He mentioned that watching the Kaiser fight was like seeing God at work. However, Kukureku noted that the gods were just, because Kaiser had absolutely the worst luck she had ever seen. Purple Taste said it was absolutely insane that a guy without a single legendary skill managed to climb to the top of the rankings. If he'd been truly lucky, the others wouldn't have even come close to his level. The girl remembered the time when Kaiser failed 10 upgrades in a row, lamenting and screaming that the whole world was against him. The giant laughed heartily, calling Kaiser the most unlucky bastard of their entire gang. The whole group laughed together around the fire. It was a rare moment of peace before the very end. The Sword Emperor smiled, admitting that Kaiser's luck had indeed reached rock bottom. The final warning bell sounded. Support for the game was ending right on schedule. A message flashed on their screens, thanking them for being part of this journey until the very last second. Purple Taste's avatar began to dissolve into blue light. He told everyone they had done a great job and said goodbye. Following him, Kukureku and the Sword Emperor disappeared, hoping to meet in some other cool game in the future. The Kaiser was left standing alone in the quiet forest. Now, it was truly over. The fire crackled sadly for the last time, before his own silhouette began to disintegrate. In a flash of light, player number 1 vanished from the world of Demrock. Service outage complete. The legendary era had officially ended. Returning to the real world, the boy immediately removed his VR headset. The lights on it went out. 2 years have passed since then. The city continued to grow, and new trends took hold of the video game market. A green bus full of people returning home was driving down a busy street. Inside the car, 2 high school students were glued to their phone screens, transfixed by a video of some hardcore, high-level gameplay. One of them couldn't believe his eyes, seeing such an insane level of control. The video showed the player single-handedly taking down a massive demon lord. Only the elite could pull off such a feat. They spoke of a ranker named Liquidator from the Executioner's Guild, claiming he was currently the best. Another guy was a huge fan of the Empress, adoring her solo playstyle. He called her the proud she-wolf of the gaming world. They wondered if any player could defeat these two. One of them thought for a moment. He remembered Kaiser, the number 1 player from the old Demrock days. But ever since that game closed, the guy had simply disappeared. They both wondered what had happened to him and what he could be doing now. It was as if he had simply disappeared into thin air, even though just a few seats away sat a guy in a military uniform, adjusting his cap and smiling. 2 years after Demrock's closure, Kang Do-yeon has finally returned. Demrock has been replaced by a new legend, a game called God of Savior. Everyone simply called her GOTS, and her user base was already huge. She promised unlimited freedom with a huge diversity of races and classes to choose from. But a familiar face was about to enter this battle. Kang Do-yeon, the man who once held the number 1 spot on Demrock, has finally completed his military service. Immediately after his discharge from the reserve, he headed straight home. Doyeon burst through the door, immediately asking where his game capsule was. His sister was shocked to see him so soon. She couldn't believe he was going to play the second he stepped through the door. From another room, a mother screamed, complaining that today's children only remember their parents when they are hungry. Doyeon didn't care about the grumbling. His gaze was fixed on his cherished goal. There it was, a VR capsule, exactly like the ones he'd seen on TV for the past 18 months. He hugged the device, savoring the moment. This was what he'd been toiling for all those months of service and accumulating his army pay for. He ran his hand over the graceful curves, admiring the quality of the build. The capsule door opened smoothly, inviting him inside. Despite being second-hand, the interior was surprisingly comfortable. He settled into his chair and lowered his helmet, ready to dive back into the virtual world. The system began scanning his retina to initiate login. It verified his ID and began the synchronization process. The synchronization was complete, and he officially entered the world of GOTS. A bright light flashed. While the game welcomed him to a paradise of adventure, he found himself in a majestic hall where the system offered him the opportunity to create a new character. He glanced at his base outfit. It was fairly simple, but it was adequate for now. He rubbed his short hair, thinking that he still looked too much like a soldier. The menu offered a ton of customization options, but he was too eager to start the game. He simply chose a random appearance and moved on. The next step was the name. He didn't even have to think twice. A smirk played on his lips as he entered his old name, Kaiser. Character creation was successful. The system welcomed Kaiser back to the world of rankers. He was given a hashtag and was immediately transported to the training area. He landed in the middle of a burning fortress. The system called it the tragic battlefield of Castle Arlen. The guy was impressed by how real everything seemed. It was definitely a step up from Demrock. The weapon selection screen flashed, offering to select starting equipment. The options were fairly simple. Daggers, whips, and standard blades. Nothing special for a beginner. He reached for the simple sword, deciding to stick with what he knew best. He was a swordsman from the start, so why change the winning formula? However, as soon as he took the weapon, a loud scream echoed throughout the courtyard. The Kaiser looked back and saw someone running towards him. A knight in shining armor was rushing towards him, looking desperate. It was Charlie, the knight's captain. He demanded to know why the mercenary was standing idle while the castle was under attack. Before Kaiser could respond, Charlie grabbed his arm and pulled him along. A system message flashed, informing him that he was now in a group with the captain. Charlie shouted that the other mercenaries were already fighting. They ran through the burning corridors of the castle, heading straight for the front lines. The Kaiser braked sharply as they reached the battlefield. The situation turned out to be even worse than it looked. Bodies lay everywhere. The castle guards were being mercilessly exterminated by a pack of ferocious beastmen. Charlie gritted his teeth, realizing the enemy had joined forces with the monsters. He suspected they had made a pact with something truly terrifying. Charlie shouted at Kaiser to move forward. If they didn't stop the invaders now, the creature would descend upon them all. He pointed the way, urging them to hurry through the side passage to save time. The Kaiser did not hesitate and followed the captain through the heavy doors. Suddenly, an arrow cut through the air with a deadly whistle. A hail of arrows hit the stone floor with a dull thud. They had been spotted. Growling beastmen emerged from the gloom, their eyes burning with bloodlust. Charlie cursed. The monsters had already flooded the castle to such depths. He prepared to fight his way through. But suddenly, a swift silhouette overtook him. It was Kaiser. Without waiting for the NPC to finish his lengthy speech, Kaiser, his hands and feet already itching with battle lust, rushed straight into the thick of the fray. A massive beastman roared, leaping out of the shadows with a heavy axe. The creature swung with enough force to shatter stone, aiming straight at Kaiser. But Kaiser's gaze had already sharpened. The world around him slowed as he entered a state of complete concentration. Charlie shouted a desperate warning, thinking the young mercenary was finished. Tilting your body slightly, the Kaiser narrowly missed the heavy blow. The axe crashed into the ground, but the warrior was already moving on. The beastman stood frozen in shock as his prey disappeared from sight. Kaiser's hand found the hilt. It was time to show them why he was a legend. In a flash of blue light, he drew his sword and cut down the monster in one smooth motion. The boy became a blur of steel and speed, his glowing eyes tracking his enemy's every move. He rushed through the pack of beastmen like a whirlwind, leaving only splashes of blood in his wake. The remaining monsters were paralyzed with fear, unable to comprehend the speed of this man. Another beastman tried to suppress him with a desperate blow from above. Kaiser easily dodged the chopping blow with a simple sidestep. Kaiser didn't give his opponent a chance to recover. Using the momentum of the rotation, he delivered a crushing, powerful knee strike. A high kick to the face sent the monster flying back, shattering its jaw. The beastman collapsed, his glowing eyes fading as he struggled to comprehend his defeat. The rest of the squad was horrified. They realized too late that they had come into contact with a monster in human form and tried to crawl away, their growls turning into whines of terror. Kaiser finished it all off with a final spinning kick, a perfect circle of light from the blade of the sword, which mowed down all the remaining enemies. He landed softly. The battle was over in just a few seconds, and he looked back at the bodies strewn along the corridor. It was almost too simple. He shook the blood off his blade, and although he was worried that he had lost some of his shape, he was pleased with the result. GG admitted to himself that he was worried because a decent amount of time had passed, but everything felt surprisingly natural. Moreover, his body felt even lighter and more responsive than in Demrock. Charlie was completely stunned. He'd never seen an unknown mercenary dispatch 5 monsters with such ease. A system notification sounded. Charlie was deeply impressed, and his favor with Kaiser grew rapidly. Kaiser wondered to himself if the standards of heroism in this world were too low. All Charlie could think was that this man was a true hero, straight out of the pages of legend. The system notifications continued to pour in. Charlie's favor had reached an all-time high. Charlie now trusted him implicitly. A special title surfaced. Maximum likability from the start. Kaiser had achieved something unique. It was a rather useful title of rare rank that provided a nice bonus to stats. Charlie laughed heartily, thanking Kaiser for making his job 1,000 times easier. He then pointed forward, noting that if they could eliminate the Dark Warlock within, they would ensure complete victory for Castle Arlen. Suddenly, purple energy began to crackle violently in the air. Charlie looked up in horror, realizing the summoning ritual had already begun. Grotesque monsters began to crawl out of the dark rifts. Their red eyes were filled with murderous intent. Shrill shrieks echoed throughout the hall. Charlie drew his sword, shouting that he would hold off the monsters here. He ordered Kaiser to go forward and stop the summon. The knight looked at Kaiser with complete trust, surrounded by a golden aura. He believed Kaiser was the only one capable of ending this. He gave the final blessing, his voice booming with the authority of a captain, as he sent Kaiser on his way to the final confrontation. Then Charlie roared into the fray, his armor glowing as he single-handedly took the brunt of the horde to clear the way. Kaiser was momentarily taken aback. This was all supposed to go horribly wrong. He remembered the training completely differently. He recalled the image from the video tutorial he'd watched. In the regular training, Charlie was always the first to enter the final room. The manual said the tutorial could change based on the user's actions, but Kaiser didn't expect it to deviate so much from the pattern on his first playthrough. The boy approached the large, ornate doors. Purple lightning flashed across the frame, sealing the door behind him. Kaiser stood alone before the massive portal, sword drawn. The air was thick with dark magic and vibrated with an ominous hum. Flickering system windows began to appear, warning him that only one person could enter, and that failure would have dire consequences. The game asked if he wished to enter. Kaiser was shocked. System messages like these weren't supposed to appear in standard training. His eyes widened in sudden realization. This wasn't just a deviation, it was a hidden element, mechanics deliberately hidden by the developers, activated only under extremely specific conditions, and the rewards for completing them were legendary. They could give the player a colossal advantage from the very start. Kaiser grinned. There was no reason to pass up such a valuable opportunity, no matter how dangerous it was. He chose the yes option. Light enveloped him as he entered the room. Inside, he found a dark warlock screaming in agony as his own summoning turned against him. The warlock was torn apart by a misty, demonic silhouette, his desperate cries filling the room as his life ebbed. The silhouette began to take on a solid, terrifying form. Kaiser watched intently, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. Massive scales and wings unfurled as the creature roared. This was far beyond the typical tutorial boss. A huge head with red eyes emerged from the shadows. The creature finally revealed itself. A shackled, iron-blooded demonic dragon. Simply in comparison, the creature was about 20 times larger than our warrior. Kaiser looked up at this legendary titan, ready for the real game to begin. The scene abruptly transitioned into history. God of Savior drew a lot of inspiration from the old legendary game Demrock, especially in regards to the tiered system, where everything was ranked from common to legendary status. It was a rigid hierarchy that determined the power levels of the entire world. Naturally, this system extended to monsters as well, but those at the very top were in a completely different league. They were called named bosses, monsters so rare and powerful that they bore unique titles, like this massive monster, a shackled, iron-blooded demonic dragon. The creature let out a deafening, bone-chilling roar. It was pure ultrasound, shaking the foundations of the entire room. The dragon screamed right in Kaiser's face, trying to break his spirit. System alerts went off immediately. He came under the crushing pressure of the legendary presence. His stats plummeted. Speed, attack, and defense plummeted. Kaiser gritted his teeth, annoyed that the developers had pulled such a dirty trick right during the tutorial. He noticed the heavy chains that held the dragon and sealed away much of its true power. But he understood that even in its sealed form, one blow from that massive front paw meant instant death. However, during his time at the top of the Demrock rankings, he has been through many such reworks. He remembered those impossible fights, where death was always just one tiny mistake away. For a man of his skill, there was always only one real choice: win or die trying. His eyes flashed with cold, absolute concentration. The dragon rushed forward, slashing the air with its jagged claws. The Kaiser spun, his boots barely touching the floor as he avoided the blow by a hair's breadth. He instantly counterattacked, his blade sparking as it scraped across the dragon's scales. The creature snapped its jaws at him, but he had already shifted his body weight for the next move. He delivered a precise slashing blow, desperately searching for a weak spot in his armor. Kaiser kept his distance, his eyes tracking every twitch of the monster's muscles. Another powerful collision filled the room with light as he barely parried the blow. The boy ran around, putting every ounce of strength into the heavy swing of his blade. He didn't blink, completely immersed in the rhythm of this life-or-death struggle. After 2 perfect hits, he realized he had only dealt 120 damage with almost 1,000,000 health. Kaiser grinned through beads of sweat. This difficulty was exactly as insane as the gaming community had predicted. On the forums, players have already called him a boss that people shouldn't be able to defeat. Some found the dragon too terrifying to even look at, let alone fight. They debated whether it was even possible to win, as even top-ranked players had failed here. Most assumed that the boss taking damage was simply a realism element, but Kaiser didn't stop there. Suddenly, the boss's title changed to the demonic dragon of sloth, and the chat literally exploded. People screamed about bugs and glitches, unable to believe that someone was actually winning. They were going crazy trying to figure out who this first-level player could possibly be. A blinding column of blue energy struck from above, piercing the dragon's very heart. For the first time in the entire fight, the monster screamed in genuine, excruciating pain. A final, powerful blast wave swept through the creature's body, ending its reign. System alerts confirmed the impossible victory. The legendary named boss had been defeated. Kaiser officially became the first person to ever kill a legendary boss during training. He leaned on his sword, breathing heavily. Covered in blood, barely believing he'd actually pulled it off, the Kaiser looked at the dragon's whereabouts, calling him a stubborn bastard. The scene changed, and finally the guy pulled his sword out of the dragon's corpse. It dawned on him that if he had suffered so much, then other top rankers probably wouldn't have been able to beat him either. On the community forums, players were furious at the developers for creating an impossible boss. The Kaiser just grinned, wondering how his old friends were doing. Suddenly, a notification popped up. He'd earned the title of First Assassin and a bunch of new traits. The traits started to stack up: Weapon Master, Hidden Dragon, Assassin, and Hero. He even unlocked the overpowered trait after meeting some extreme conditions. Then came something spectacular, a unique feature called the Eye of Truth. The Kaiser couldn't believe his luck. Players are usually lucky if they leave the tutorial with at least one trait. Traits were a core part of the system in God of Savior, giving players specialization. They ranged from exploration-focused conduits to martial sword masters. The higher the achievements, the higher the trait rank granted. He played around with abilities like location tracking and immunity to status effects, and yet he settled on the most interesting one. The Eye of Truth was a unique rank trait that allowed him to see through hidden things. The other traits he acquired were distinct but not unique. Other players might have one of them, but no one had all of them. The Eye of Truth was a different matter. It was literally the only feature of its kind in the entire gaming world. With a unique trait and 5 others, Kaiser felt like he'd hit the jackpot. The legendary title of First Killer was even more of a cheat. Providing massive damage buffs against bosses, Kaiser practically glowed with happiness. A loser like him had never had such luck before. But then he noticed that there was someone else left in the room. Charlie, the commander of the Knights, was still standing, leaning heavily on his sword. The knight was beaten and breathing heavily, clearly in a state of shock. Charlie stepped closer, his boots clicking on the bloody floor. The Kaiser wondered what was on the knight's mind, and how he had survived it all. Charlie asked if Kaiser had actually killed the beast that had made such a terrifying roar. He was stunned that Kaiser was unharmed, and demanded to know who he was. Kaiser tried to explain, but Charlie interrupted him, saying that it didn't matter where he came from. The knight stated that a hero is born in times of chaos, looking at the Kaiser with pure awe. Kaiser simply stared back, not quite sure how to react to all this sudden drama. Charlie believed that Kaiser would be the ray of light that would bring great change to the world. The knight dropped to one knee, offering his service to the hero standing before him. A system window popped up. Charlie wanted to swear eternal allegiance to become his loyal blade. If the Kaiser agreed, Charlie would become his official subordinate and receive all the privileges. The Kaiser was shocked. This was a huge improvement on the training award. But there was a catch. Charlie was technically a dead figure from the past, so there were no active benefits. After all, learning is just a memory from the past. He told Charlie to do as he wished, deciding that it was just a formality anyway. The main character accepted the oath, and Charlie's loyalty was officially recorded in the game's memory. The war, known as the Tragedy of Castle Arlen, was rewritten as a victory in Charlie's memories. The system noted that he could now sleep soundly, looking forward to a future with the Kaiser. Kaiser repeated the phrase quietly to himself as he watched the light begin to surround them. The notification informed Kaiser that he would soon be transported to the Pantheon through a portal. The teleportation circle glowed with intense blue energy, pulling Kaiser away from the training area. Charlie looked at him one last time, addressing him as his master. The knight asked where they were heading next. Kaiser hesitated for a second, considering the question as the world around him faded. And then he replied with a small, confident smile that they would go where they were needed. He said meaningfully that the world is now in complete confusion and chaos. Charlie was visibly touched by Kaiser's answer, and as he repeated the words, a light lit up his face. The countdown to the transfer reached 5 seconds as the training room began to completely dissolve. Charlie quickly extended his hand, handing Kaiser a necklace with a glowing pink gemstone. He asked his master to accept the gift. The Kaiser accepted the gift, surprised by the object's sudden release. The countdown reached 2 seconds. Charlie smiled gratefully one last time before disappearing. He thanked his master and asked him to bring salvation. The transfer ended, and Kaiser was pulled through the void. He found himself in a grand celestial hall. The system announced his welcome to the Pantheon. It was the place where one chose a god and determined one's future path, standing before a massive, glowing pillar of information. The Kaiser prepared to take the next step on his journey, as the blessings of the gods awaited him. Kang Du-yan finally reached the Pantheon, the place most players simply called the card lottery. Essentially, it was the heart of the game, where your entire future was decided by a single summon. This room made more people laugh and cry than anything else in the game. The rules were simple. You could only serve one god, and that god determined your character's class. Gods were divided into 3 ranks: legends, heroes, and myths. The gods of legends were essentially legends, born from stories passed down from generation to generation. The hero gods were former humans who achieved divinity through their own deeds. And then came the main figures, mythical gods like Zeus and Odin, who created entire mythologies. Naturally, they were in a completely different league. The sheer number of cards was staggering. But Du-yan didn't expect much, given his usual trash luck. He was about to draw a random card when something caught his eye. One single card glowed brightly with gold. He activated his new skill, Eye of Truth, to see what was truly hidden beneath the surface. He was stunned. The skill allowed him to see every hidden secret. If this was all for real, he could practically guarantee himself a top catch on every try. The guy remembered his old friends who constantly made fun of him for his pathetic luck. He always laughed with them, but in reality, it left quite a bitter taste in his soul. But this This could be his ticket back to the top of the rankings. He took a deep breath and ordered himself to remain calm. And then he aimed straight at the gold cards and nothing else. He reached out and grabbed her. She vibrated with pure power. The boy pulled out Tyr, the one-armed sword god, a deity of mythical rank. Do-yeon couldn't believe it. A mythical god on his first try. But the system immediately rejected him. Apparently, his vessel hadn't even been formed yet. He froze in shock. The game was literally telling him no. He couldn't become an apostle. Even Tyr looked completely confused. Such a situation shouldn't have been possible. He had never heard of anyone having a problem with the vessel before. Then he realized something and his eyes widened. Players usually died at the boss's hands to receive the goddess's revelation. But since he killed the cursed creature, the goddess never appeared. The guy completely missed the revelation, and then brought up the status screen, but everything looked normal for the first level. There was one problem, though. His class was simply adventurer, not apostle. The special characteristics of an apostle that he should have had were simply absent. He began to panic. If he couldn't get a grade, he would become dead weight. Drawing more cards was pointless without a vessel to hold the power. He fell to his knees, wondering if he'd ruined his entire game before it even began. Deleting his character would have meant a 60-day ban. He didn't have that much time. But wait, he noticed something else and looked down. Something buried under the other cards. It was a red card. He hadn't even heard of the existence of a red rank in this game, but he still touched it because he had nothing to lose. The system lit up. He had just chosen a hidden card and become an apostle of Cassiar, the last forgotten adventurer. Since he already had an adventurer's vessel, it actually worked. He officially advanced to the last adventurer class. The class description stated that humanity was originally powerful adventurers, but they faded away until only this last dynasty remained. A wave of powerful red energy erupted around Do-yeon as the power of the last adventurer took root within his body. His unique ability was insane. It allowed him to use skills from any class without any of the usual limitations. He realized he was no longer locked into a single path and could literally use every skill in the game. This allowed him to personally select the most powerful skills and build a unique skill tree that no one else could match. The combination of the Eye of Truth to find the best skills with his new freedom to use them all made for a terrifying combination. He was well on his way to becoming a true Omnimaster, with absolutely no weaknesses for his enemies to exploit. After the class change was completed, the system started a countdown for it to be sent to the main world. He smiled, thinking that this trip would definitely be worth the effort this time. When the timer reached 0, he focused on one goal: to reclaim his title as a top ranker. The scene changed. He arrived under the bright, clear sky of a vast, sprawling city. It was Ard, the city started, and the place was literally teeming with other players. Nearby, a player was throwing a real tantrum over a bad lottery call, while his friend tried to convince him that all was not lost. Do-yeon took in the sights, looking like the most ordinary face in the crowd. A couple of guild scouts were surveying the area, but they were clearly disappointed by the lack of talent. They were supposed to be prestigious recruiters, but most players treated them like pushy barkers. One of them complained about his monthly quota, worrying that his boss would be hovering over him again. But suddenly they stopped abruptly and looked at Do-yeon, who was passing by. They took one look at his simple equipment and assumed he was nothing more than a walking disaster and not a player. They decided there was no point in wasting their time on him and simply left with a sigh. Do-yeon ignored them and checked the hero rank necklace Charlie had given him. It grew stronger every time he gained experience. This item was absolutely overpowered. Even the basic passive properties were better than most high-level gear. He was practically drowning in bliss at how amazing his luck had finally become. Suddenly, a regional quest popped up in this location, a simple goblin clearing. You had to kill 40 goblins for a decent reward. Nearby players were delighted that they didn't even have to queue for the quest. Hunter Dante rallied the crowd by declaring that he would leave the extermination of the goblins to them. The town square turned into a chaotic crowd of people shouting calls to join a group for a joint grind. Do-yeon watched the madness, realizing that almost everyone was forming teams. A guy named Shield Beast approached him and asked if he wanted to join a group aiming to reach level 12. The rest of the group was eager to get the team bonus and figured that another sword certainly wouldn't hurt. He thought about it for a second and decided they were right. This was the most effective way to start. Hunting in a group was practically mandatory at these early levels if you wanted to keep up with the bonus experience. He accepted the invitation. The group was officially formed, and Do-yeon took his old name. Shield Beast saw this name and asked if he was some kind of Kaiser superfan. Archer explained that Kaiser was a legendary #1 player from the old Demrock days. Duyan just scratched the back of his head and pretended he had never even heard that name before. The group was inspired, ready to sweep through the goblin fields like a hurricane and take level 12. He gave them a short and clumsy encouragement as they set out. The battle began immediately. Shield Beast crashed into the goblin, stunning him from the very start. Shield Beast let out a roar, performing a perfect shield strike and creating an opening in the enemy's defense for the rest of the group. The archer and mage immediately joined in, unleashing a hail of arrows and magic projectiles on their target. Their coordination paid off when the system notified them that they had successfully defeated the green goblin. However, more shrill squeals came from the shadows. This hunt was far from over. A pack of goblins surged from all sides, smelling blood and looking for a fight. Shieldabist dug his feet into the ground and raised his shield, desperately trying to hold the line under the sudden onslaught. His teammates screamed in fear as they realized they were about to be completely crushed. The commander tried his best to restrain the grinning creatures, calling on his allies to deal with them quickly. Panic gripped the warriors as they realized their key skills were still on cooldown, leaving him completely defenseless. Taking advantage of the opportunity, one of the goblins rose high into the air to strike from a blind spot. Shield Beast looked up in pure horror, realizing he was helpless against the blow coming from above. The green goblin screeched, baring his teeth at the intruders, a dagger in his face. A sharp blue streak cut through the grass before the monster could even move. Kaiser cut through his target while Shield Beast held his ground with his heavy shield. Shieldabist could hardly believe how easily this guy handled the situation. Yubin Khan and Imfort Head were equally stunned by this sight, but Kaiser didn't slow down. Already rushing towards the next group, he pushed off the ground with a loud thud, raising a huge cloud of dust. 2 more goblins instantly fell under his crimson blade. The team went into ecstasy, shouting Kaiser's name as he carried out a complete cleanup. The warrior calmly sheathed his weapon, looking as if he had barely warmed up. Shieldabist came closer, genuinely impressed by the newcomer's skill. He was already convinced that they would fly through this dungeon with the wind. Then he noticed something in the shadows and shouted a warning. A whole pack of green goblins began to pour out from behind the trees. It was a huge horde, and they looked much hungrier than the first group. Shieldabist panicked, calling on everyone to flee immediately. But instead of retreating, Kaiser rushed straight into the heart of the crowd. Monsters attacked him from all sides. He jumped high into the air, intending to fall straight into the center of their ranks. A memory from his past flashed through his mind, his eyes glowing red as he clutched a massive sword. In those days, even the forest itself seemed to tremble before the scale of its power. A powerful blast wave swept across the clearing. The scene abruptly shifted to the past. In the flashback, Purple Taste wondered why he always got into fights in such reckless situations. The Kaiser merely turned around in response, wondering why he had ever thought he was being reckless. Purple Taste noted that jumping headlong into battle with low health was essentially tantamount to suicide. Kukureku confirmed this. The hero pointed to the giant corpse of the monster behind him. He asked if he hadn't won in the end. The big man admitted that it was true, but warned him that it was still incredibly dangerous. Returning to the present, Kaiser looked at the swarm of enemies and admitted that from the outside, it might indeed look that way. He thought to himself that there was no reason to take unnecessary risks for the sake of an empty fight. He rushed forward, moving faster than the crew could blink. From his point of view, he never actually fought recklessly. He hovered in the air, perfectly tracking his enemy's every move. The echo of his past insisted that he entered the battle only because he was already firmly confident of his victory. The forest fell silent for a split second while he made his move. A notification popped up when he activated his crush skill. His blade slashed straight across the goblin's chest, nearly tearing its body to pieces. The system confirmed the kill and rewarded him with a new hide. The boy surveyed the battlefield, finding only one remaining goblin with poison darts in the rear. He pushed off the ground, moving faster than the monsters could react. His strategy was simple. When facing an enemy with superior numbers, it was always best to eliminate the shooters first, and so he rushed forward and killed the remaining guards right in the air, leaving the fat goblin with the blowpipe completely exposed and completely defenseless. Kaiser became a veritable whirlwind of steel, cutting down the remaining goblins with terrifying precision. In the midst of the battle, his overcome trait activated, allowing him to transcend his physical limits. With his eyes burning, he prepared for the next crushing blow. The goblin screeched in pure horror as he watched his friends being slaughtered, but it was too late to run. The Kaiser had already rushed past him, his blade leaving a glowing trail in the air. He moved so fast that his feet barely touched the grass. The boy stood firm against the horde, not caring at all about their numbers. The monsters tried to overwhelm him with numbers, but he parried each attack with a frankly bored look. His concentration was absolute as he locked onto his next target. He instantly enhanced his weapon, driving the dagger straight into the goblin's skull. The combination of his Weapon Master trait and his Adventurer class was essentially a cheat code, allowing him to use any weapon skill. Even Kaiser himself was surprised by how unbalanced this combination actually was. He picked up the goblin's dislodged weapon, which had just been thrown aside, and he activated the exploit weakness, dealing a brutal critical hit that instantly felled the monster. The clearing was quickly turning into a goblin cemetery. He switched to a heavy club and began to smash everything around. Whatever weapon he picked up, the system would give him the perfect skill to use it. One of the goblins had his head crushed by a powerful blow from above. The monsters began to realize that they had encountered a monster worthy of themselves. Kaiser didn't give them a second to rest, plunging his blade into the throat of another goblin. Immediately after this, he delivered a heavy blow with his club to the neck of the next enemy. He finished off the last few with a sweeping blow from his blunt weapon. His skill grew at an insane rate as he used every weapon type simultaneously. Seeing the carnage he'd unleashed, he was quite pleased with his new build. He expected to learn the skills, but he never thought he would be able to use them so effectively right from the start. He couldn't help but grin. This Adventurer class was even better than he'd hoped. Meanwhile, Shieldabist watched from the sidelines, looking completely stunned. The guy was sweating profusely, wondering if what he saw was even possible for a newbie. He knew that even experienced groups would have to work hard to cut down a flock of that size. And this guy single-handedly mowed down the entire horde, as if it were a regular warm-up. A name from his past surfaced in his mind. Kaiser, the legendary ranker. He wondered if this really could be the genius from Demrock's old days, but he quickly dismissed the thought. It was impossible for a legend to end up in a group like his own. People online wondered where the legendary Kaiser had gone, and most believed it was too late for him to catch up. But Shieldy Beast couldn't stop thinking about this coincidence. He looked at his mysterious teammate again, wondering who he really was. He remembered the rumors that the real Kaiser had been a battle-obsessed maniac. Seeing the expression on Kaiser's face, he began to seriously fear that this guy might be a little out of his mind. However, Kaiser's expression remained calm and professional. The remaining weapons dissolved into light as the battle finally came to an end. Kaiser was pleased with the results. He officially bypassed the game's existing equipment restrictions. Having cleared his horizon, he checked his status. Thanks to powerful titles and jumping 3 levels in a single hunt, he'd reached level 4 with impressive stats for a beginner. Pure efficiency. He allocated points to dexterity and perception to build a solid foundation for his swordsmanship. Thanks to titles like First Assassin and A Necklace from Charlie, his stats looked impressive. Kaiser took a short pause to catch his breath, appearing completely unperturbed by the sudden surge in power. His teammates, on the other hand, were in complete awe. They couldn't stop praising him for how easily he dispatched that horde. Shield Beast and Archer began to whisper to each other, wondering if this guy was the Kaiser from the legends. Tank admitted that after what he'd seen, this was the only logical explanation. Even Archer began to lean toward this theory, while the hero of the occasion simply scratched his head in the background, trying to maintain an unperturbed appearance. Kaiser merely smiled awkwardly at them, thinking to himself that they were, after all, absolutely right. He really was that legendary player. The Archer was still in shock, wondering if Kaiser had somehow managed to knock out a divine mythical trait to deal such damage. The protagonist hastened to downplay his achievements, attributing everything to his own traits and a bit of luck with his titles. The news of his title caused another storm of emotions among them, and Yubinkon was already trying her best to gain his trust for the future. The group took a well-deserved rest among the lush greenery of the forest. Once their stamina was restored, Shieldbeast showed signs of being ready to return to the grind. Feeling confident thanks to Kaiser's presence, the Archer proposed challenging an even larger group of goblins this time. The Kaiser just chuckled and agreed to this plan. Everyone was on edge, ready to rush back into battle now that they knew about this killer in their group. But for a split second, Kaiser's expression changed as his thoughts wandered off somewhere else. He was suddenly flooded with memories of the old days, when he walked shoulder to shoulder with a team of world-class rankers who were used to relying on him for everything. Remembering their constant bickering and inflated egos, he felt a contrast with the sincere newcomers around him. He stared at the sky, wondering where his old acquaintances were now and what they were doing. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden blood-red system alert of an urgent quest to hunt down a mutated goblin warrior. Kaiser's gaze sharpened as he read the target's name. It seemed his warm-up was officially over. The scene suddenly changed. Sunlight was breaking through the clouds. While they were preparing for the mission, the group reached the entrance to a huge, dark cave. Shieldabist and Yubinkan were sweating with excitement, but Kaiser remained completely unperturbed. They hunted non-stop on their way to this tomb. The extra grind paid off, allowing the entire party to reach level 9. But they were entering a location notorious for being a rookie killer. Online forums were overflowing with player complaints about how impossible the raid was. The Tomb of Arda was the first serious wall, and most of the new recruits died on the first attempt. The difficulty spike here was insane compared to the normal mobs they were fighting outside. This dungeon required perfect teamwork and precise adherence to specific attack patterns. This was the very place where most new bands eventually failed completely. Some even advised going through it alone, just to avoid working with comrades who always mess things up. Yubinkan looked worried as she considered the stakes at stake. Shield Beast announced to everyone that they must clear this place if they wanted to advance to higher-level raids. Kaiser merely watched. As in reality, the companies here valued experience. Large guilds wouldn't talk to anyone who hadn't defeated this boss. Attempts to lie about achievements were thwarted by an uncheatable system. Cheap tricks didn't work in this game, as every action was tracked. Everything was recorded in the adventure book. She logged your quests, your materials, and every boss kill you ever took down. This entry was essentially a player's resume. To join the next city's groups, they needed to have this purge noted on their record, so they had no choice but to grit their teeth and push forward. Kaiser knew that the boss in the next city was actually mandatory for further progress, and finally he took a step forward and stopped. They arrived at the location of the modified Goblin Warrior, a rare rank boss. The Kaiser turned with a grin and asked if they were ready to enter. Shieldy Beast and the others had carefully studied the strategy guides and were determined not to let themselves down. The group gathered at the foot of the massive stone doors. Shieldy Beast took one last look at Kaiser. He took a deep breath and headed towards the gate. The big guy touched the door, activating the raid entry portal. A system prompt appeared, asking the group to confirm their readiness to begin. Head was on edge and fully prepared for battle. Everyone agreed to go in, including Kaiser. The system checked their levels and started the login sequence. Kaiser stretched and cracked his knuckles, ready to warm up. The heavy stone doors creaked open slowly, revealing the arena. The group stepped over the threshold, the sound of their boots echoing off the stone floor. Torches flared along the walls, illuminating the cave. An elite boss with 20,000 health units stood waiting for them. The transformed goblin warrior let out a low growl, tightening his grip on his massive cleaver. He let out a deafening roar that shook the entire cave. Shieldy Beast and the others watched in horror, realizing just how dangerous the elite boss could be. The Kaiser shouted a warning, sensing the attack before it began. The creature rose into the air, falling down like a multi-ton weight with a blade raised high. Shieldbeast understood that even with Kaiser's help, the group had to stand firmly on its own feet. He realized that the Kaiser could not protect everyone at the same time. The tank took a step forward, determined to fulfill its role and hold its position. The boss rushed forward with a terrifying howl. Shieldbeast ordered the team to spread out and not stand in the monster's way. They scrambled for cover just as the goblin hit the ground with a thud. Shieldbeast identified this onslaught as the first part of his attack pattern. He raised his shield and took the monster's next blow, the force of which sent a noticeable vibration through his arms. The goblin was stunned for a few seconds after his attack was blocked. Shieldbeast called out to the group, telling them that now was their chance to strike. Head and Yubinkan immediately launched a counteroffensive. Spells and steel collided with the boss, creating a powerful explosion of light and sound. The smoke cleared, revealing a recovering monster, its eyes blazing with fury. Shieldbeast was taken aback by how quickly the creature rose to its feet. The goblin warrior swung for another crushing blow. Shieldbeast took the massive blade onto his shield again. His defense trait activated, glowing brightly and boosting his stats. He shouted, attracting the boss's attention, urging the others to keep up the pressure. Before the tank could even finish its sentence, Kaiser had already rushed past in a blur, unleashing a barrage of continuous chopping blows on the boss. New magical explosions flew towards the boss, crushing his defenses. A powerful explosion shook the monster, lowering its health level lower and lower. Shieldy Beast felt that the first phase was going perfectly, and they were in complete control of the fight. but his teammates behind him suddenly shouted a warning that the next pattern was starting earlier than expected. The boss's health bar dropped below half, triggering a move that wasn't in any of the guides. Shieldy Beast stood frozen as the monster prepared a move the tank wasn't prepared for. Kaiser didn't hesitate for a second, rushing towards the boss with incredible speed. He unleashed a flurry of blows, the movements of which were almost impossible to follow. The monster screamed in pain as Kaiser's blade reached its target. Shieldy Beast watched this, completely amazed by the incredible skill that Kaiser was displaying. Kaiser continued his furious onslaught, not giving the boss a single second to rest. With a dark grin and blazing eyes, he announced that the monster pattern had officially come to an end. The scene shifted to the past, where Kaiser's group already had a legendary reputation as the strongest squad. During the interview, a reporter asked him to reveal the secret to his success in clearing impossible dungeons. Kaiser responded simply, noting that it was all about everyone concentrating on what they did best. She noted that a standard group typically requires 4 roles: tank, damage dealer, healer, and support. Since his squad didn't use a tank, she wondered if it was even possible to raid like that. Kaiser acknowledged that tanks are indeed a critical part of any team. They have to face the boss alone, interrupt his attack patterns, and absorb all the damage. The reporter was stunned when he told her that he had handled all of this on his own. A confident smirk was her only answer. Returning to the present, the boss was finally losing his mind with rage. Shieldy Beast watched this with disbelief, unable to comprehend what he saw. Even professional tanks had a hard time interrupting boss patterns using their crowd control skills. But Kaiser did it effortlessly, without using a single skill. And he managed to cope with all this by playing the role of a pure fighter. The mutated goblin warrior let out a furious roar. For Kaiser, patterns of this level were not even the slightest challenge. He struck again, completely stopping the monster's offensive momentum. The rest of the group was speechless as he continued to aim exclusively at vital points. Shieldy Beast kept a close eye on his health bar. The boss's health points finally reached 20%. He warned everyone to get ready, because the second phase was beginning. The team took up positions, ready for whatever came next. A system alert flashed. The boss's mutation trait had finally begun to manifest. The ground cracked as the warrior trait activated. The goblin went into a full berserk state, instantly increasing all of his stats. Kaiser was just waiting for this part. The mutant characteristic has been activated. Mutation traits were special abilities that varied from one boss to the next. This particular goblin possessed 2 such traits, known as counting rhymes. If a group landed 4 physical attacks in a row, everyone would receive a debuff. And if 3 magical attacks hit in a row, the boss reflected all the damage back. The boss let out a piercing scream. Due to the berserk effect, the attack and movement speed of the entire party decreased. The group panicked as they realized how much harder this fight had just gotten. But Kaiser received a unique notification. His heroic trait prevented mental contamination. He was completely immune to the boss's mutation and berserk effects. He smirked, realizing that those nasty debuffs had no effect on him at all. Shieldy Beast ordered everyone to stop attacking and focus solely on dodging for now. Tank assumed that Kaiser had also fallen into a trap, but the Kaiser merely told him to wait and took a step forward. His eyes gleamed with a sinister, furious glint. The Kaiser smiled, ready to finish this raid alone. Shieldy Beast could only watch as the tension grew. With a sharp increase in speed, Kaiser took to the air to finish the job. The mutated warrior let out a final desperate roar as the battle reached its climax. Kaiser met the monster's fury head-on, delivering a powerful blow that lit up the entire cave. His eyes glowed a cold red light as he prepared for the final blow. He tormented the boss with relentless efficiency, blood splattering across the cave walls. Shieldy Beast and Ubinkin could barely move, completely bound by the boss's status ailments. They watched in deep shock, wondering how Kaiser was the only one standing firmly on his feet and unharmed. Shieldy Beast could only watch as the realization of the colossal difference in skill level finally dawned on him. Another blow hit the target, cutting deep into the boss's defense. At that moment, the Kaiser truly looked like a true god of war. He continued his slaughter, moving as a blur that the monster could not even hope to follow. The mutated goblin was completely overwhelmed, his health bar rapidly melting under the onslaught. Shieldy Beast whispered his name, unable to look away from this display of power. The monster screamed in agony as its end approached. The Kaiser showed no emotion, remaining perfectly focused on the kill. He swung his blade in a wide, deadly arc, cutting through everything in his path. Every move he made was calculated for maximum lethality. At this stage, he wasn't just fighting, He was methodically taking his opponent apart, piece by piece. Blood splattered everywhere as he landed another critical hit. Kaiser finally froze, and the crimson aura around him filled with concentrated power. Notifications confirmed the increase in sword level and mastery. Kaiser's brutal blows left the boss breathless. The monster froze in place, paralyzed with terror under the powerful onslaught. Leaving no room for his opponent to breathe, he performed a divine instant move from a distance. In the blink of an eye, Kaiser's silhouette was already right behind the boss. At that moment, his eyes suddenly glowed with a deadly red light, a sign that his final ultimate had been activated. A massive pillar of light shot out blindingly at the very moment his slashing blow split the Titan's body in two. The sheer force of the blow was so devastating that it consumed everything in its path. As the light faded, the once fearsome boss became a pile of rubble, collapsing to the ground as its existence officially came to an end. The system confirmed the enemy's defeat and announced that the dungeon had been cleared. The rest of the group stood in stunned silence, barely able to digest what they had just seen. They started talking among themselves, wondering who this guy really was. Shieldabist wondered in his mind whether this could really be that legendary ranker, the real Kaiser. Yubin Khan and Bracer Forehead could only watch with their mouths wide open. They paused for a moment, looking around the empty cave, still feeling the fury of the battle that had just passed. The boss's body lay motionless on the ground, a testament to this one-sided massacre. The final time rankings were released, showing Shield Beast's group in first place by a huge margin. The Kaiser calmly gripped his sword, looking as if he was already ready for the next fight. Taking first place for contribution to the battle, Kaiser collected the loot from the boss: rare leather armor, mutated goblin shoulder pads, and a massive red greatsword to top it off. But the true reward was the title of Speedrun Throne, granting him a permanent boost to his speed stat. Kaiser looked back at the scene with a satisfied grin, commenting on the hunt. With a sinister glint in his eyes, he admitted that goblins were best enjoyed when chopped into cabbage. Sometime later, the band was catching their breath in a dark cave, still processing the fact that they had just been dragged out solo. The archer and the mage stood with their jaws dropped, seeing the extreme rarity of the rewards they had just received. Teammates rushed to thank Kaiser for this great victory. The Kaiser merely waved it off with a smile, acting as if it was no big deal. He was already looking ahead towards the next test. Shieldbeast brought up the rankings, asking Kaiser if he wanted to see his name at the very top. Shieldbeast's group was in first place. Shieldbeast felt terribly embarrassed and apologized for not changing the band's name to give Kaiser the credit he deserved. Kaiser just scratched his head, realizing that having his name in the spotlight was a real headache. This achievement was enough to get them noticed in the top 10 guilds in the game. Even for a starting city, holding on to first place was a powerful statement of strength. They managed to take a line even higher than the legendary player known as Liquidator. Shieldbeast and his crew continued to apologize, feeling as if they had stolen his thunder. They offered him whatever he wanted as compensation: money, items, anything. The Kaiser just let out a short laugh, amused at how seriously they were taking this. Shieldbeast looked up, surprised by this reaction. The Kaiser told them to relax, because the system automatically registered the group leader's name anyway. Besides, he himself hadn't expected to take first place so early, and in general, he was not a fan of fame. It usually brings more trouble than benefit, but he certainly wasn't going to complain about the awards. He had just acquired a full warrior set, and the stats of these rare plus rank items were simply overpowered. These were the absolute best items available in this part of the game. With such loot, he had no chance of remaining in a bad mood. He started laughing out loud, which confused Shieldbeast even more. GG couldn't stop laughing at how successful this approach turned out to be. He again repeated to the group to close this topic because everything was fine with them. Shieldbeast now officially became his fan, swearing complete loyalty to the Kaiser. He judged Kaiser's personality to be as high level as his combat skills. The portal hummed to life as the dungeon prepared to close. On the way out, Shieldbeast admitted that he had previously thought the hype around Kaiser was exaggerated, but now he sincerely believed in it. The boy looked at Kaiser's figure once more, finally understanding what his new identity meant. And then the protagonist called out to him, asking if he was planning to stay behind. Without further ado, Shieldbeast stepped through the portal, leaving the dungeon behind. The blue energy of the teleportation gate swirled around them as they returned back to the world. They returned back to the city, whose towers soared high into the clear sky. The group headed straight to Ardback Alley to find a specific shop. Inside the alchemist's shop, everything resembled another world, filled with strange and magical objects. The Kaiser looked around, and his sharp gaze fell on the figure at the counter. A man in a dark cloak stood behind the counter, his face hidden in the shadows. It was alchemist Kalda, and he didn't seem to be happy to have visitors. The rest of the group instantly shuddered, but Kaiser saw only an unpleasant man. Kalda gave them a hard look, wondering if they'd come here to abandon their mission. He began complaining about how desperately he needed research materials and how most people had let him down. The Kaiser didn't say a word. He simply slammed a bottle of dark red liquid down on the counter. Kalda's eyes widened. He couldn't believe he was looking at the blood of a mutated goblin and started screaming in shock because it hadn't even been 40 minutes since they left. The group stood with their heads held high, enjoying the alchemist's complete disbelief. Thanks to the Kaiser's title of maximum sympathy, Kalda changed his anger to mercy, becoming absolutely obsessed with them. The system confirmed the quest's completion, and the rewards poured in. Kaiser received a hefty sum of gold and a special silver ring crafted by the alchemist himself. The experience gained from the quest raised Kaiser's levels 2 levels in a row. Passing Trial 0 opened the way to the main continent. For his high rank and reaching level 10, he also received skill summoning tickets. The rest of the group was going crazy with joy, rejoicing that they were finally leaving the starting location. But there was a hidden reward here too. Kaiser received a personal postcard from Kalda. It was a rare plus item, a simple card, handwritten by the alchemist himself. The Kaiser decided that he could check the postcard later, since he had more important things to do. He called up the menu to use his skill summon ticket, the moment he had been waiting for so long. A set of glowing cards appeared before him, floating in a sea of blue light. He stared at the shimmering deck, his heart beating a little faster. It wasn't anything like the Pantheon's rewards, but it was adequate. He activated his Eye of Truth to see through the cards and choose the best one. Gigi knew that there would be nothing legendary in the low-ranking ticket, so he did not raise his expectations. He pulled out Dash Strike, a normal rank skill that allowed him to dash forward while attacking. It was a solid, reliable skill he'd used in the past, but his eyes were already on the second ticket. He prepared to use a random ticket, hoping to change the course of the game. A sudden system warning instantly brought him out of his state of anticipation. He looked at the screen in complete disbelief. The system was forcibly terminating his session because he'd been playing for 10 hours straight. The system started saying that this limit was created to prevent players from dying from exhaustion and developing a gaming addiction. But the guy was shocked that 10 hours had already passed. The summoning window had already begun to close when the connection was interrupted. With only 2 seconds remaining, Kaiser desperately tried to complete the call. The countdown reached the final second, and the glowing cards began to spin in a blinding vortex of light. Kang Du-yeon rushed forward with a panicked cry, desperately reaching out to make the final choice. But the screen suddenly went white as the system forcibly shut him down, cutting off the connection just as the call was being completed. His room was plunged into darkness, leaving only the faint hum of the high-tech gaming capsule. Kang Du-yeon flipped open the lid and stared into space as if he had just seen a ghost. He began gasping for air, clutching his chest as if he had run a marathon, and then he simply let out a deafening scream of pure disappointment. Getting kicked out of the game at the very climax of a summoning is every gamer's nightmare. It was a beautiful sunny day outside. But inside this apartment, the gamer's soul was shuddering in agony. Do-yeon sat there, shaking his legs madly, eager to get back. He watched as the clock struck 10 o'clock. The time had finally come. He bit his thumb, a mad gleam in his eyes. He needed to see what he had received. Without wasting a second, he dove back into the capsule. The system scanned his eyes, confirmed his identity, and immediately started the synchronization process. A loading screen appeared, welcoming him back to the world of God the Savior. A short message wished him a pleasant journey, as if he were here for a vacation. He respawned right in the alleyway of Arda, where he had ended up last time. Kaiser didn't even stop to look around. He was obsessed with the yellow light he saw just before the blackout. It usually meant a first-class catch. He checked his inventory and found one unconfirmed skill card in the vault. That was it. He was hoping for something legendary, but he was careful not to get his expectations too high, lest he be disappointed later. He touched the card, and it exploded in a magnificent flash of light. It turned out to be the heroic skill Backstab. Technically, it was intended for assassins, and the description said it allowed you to teleport behind an enemy to deal massive damage. Kaiser stared in shock at the name. Backstab. It was the signature move of assassins and the very skill absolutely every ranged player hated. He instantly closed the distance, making distance completely irrelevant to anyone trying to escape. A sinister smile crept across his face. He was a warrior, but he just unearthed one of the best mobility skills in the game. He began to chuckle to himself, realizing that he could now take out both monsters and players without any problems. Just then, a couple walked by. The guy was bragging about how well he knew the game. He stopped mid-sentence, looking completely confused. He looked around and saw some guy standing in the gateway, laughing like a villain from a low-budget movie. The Kaiser was so lost in his own delight that he didn't even notice how creepy he looked, because he was practically steaming. The couple was absolutely horrified. They were convinced they had just stumbled upon a complete psychopath. They didn't even finish their conversation, but simply turned around and ran in the opposite direction. Kaiser finally came to his senses, wondering why everyone suddenly had such an allergy to this alley. He shook the thought off. It was time to stop looking like a newbie and put on his real gear. He pulled the loot from a mutated goblin. Donning the set, he looked dangerous as hell. The red armor and massive sword slung over his shoulder spoke for themselves, making people think twice before tangling with him. A system notification warned that once Raven was sent to the main continent, there would be no return to Ard. Kaiser didn't hesitate. As the final countdown began, he stepped straight into the massive blue portal. The Kaiser looked ahead, feeling a slight regret that he was leaving without a proper farewell. He thought back to the group he had left behind, realizing he was actually starting to like these guys. The portal's countdown was also approaching its end, and he resigned himself to the fact that if they were destined to meet again, the game would arrange it itself. With 1 second remaining, the system confirmed that he was being transported to the main continent. A massive pillar of blue light erupted, shooting straight out from the starting area. It landed in the square of a majestic city, a place where every player arrived with great goals and high expectations. The players standing nearby were chatting about how this was the real starting point, where everyone was gathering to search for the group. The sprawling city of Raven lay before him, marking the true beginning of his journey. Suddenly, a group of mounted knights rushed through the streets, ordering everyone to get out of the way. Guards dragged the bound criminal across the square while he screamed to be released. Kaiser watched as a host of new systems opened, including the arena, duels, and workshops. The silhouette of a vast city towered over him, a place where privileges for newcomers were a thing of the past. A system prompt popped up, advising crime victims to contact the city guard directly. He was genuinely impressed, realizing that the main continent was on a completely different level. The merchant called out to him, offering him some local ash beer and complimenting his stylish red outfit. Other vendors tempted customers to try exotic dishes like lobster and hot guinea pig soup, promising gifts to any buyer. The Kaiser began to understand why people were distracted by city life and completely forgot about hunting. He gave himself a quick slap to regain his focus, telling himself he could enjoy the views later. With his sword over his shoulder and a confident grin on his face, he wondered how he would begin his first hunt. It didn't take him long to find the case. In one smooth motion, he cut the goblin in half. He advanced onto the Raven Plains, where he was immediately surrounded by a fresh flock of monsters. His red armor began to glow as the three-piece set effect activated, giving him a massive advantage against the goblins. The monsters instantly froze in fear, and their fighting spirit collapsed the moment they saw him. Kaiser leaped into the air, activating his jump strike skill to clear the area. He cut a path straight through the center of the pack, and the system confirmed multiple kills within seconds. He landed perfectly in the tall grass, already looking out for his next target. With glowing red eyes and blood on his blade, he looked more like a predator than a player. His red greatsword actually began to increase its attack power with each enemy he defeated. He couldn't help but laugh, completely intoxicated by the incredible power of his new gear. Given his base stats and scalable weapons, he was an absolute monster here. He got tremendous pleasure from this, enjoying the feeling of his complete inviolability. Gigi opened the quest log, nodding that he was only a few kills away from another level up. His eyes suddenly flashed gold as he felt something change in the air behind him. A purple, ghostly figure rushed out of the shadows at him. Kaiser instantly realized it was not a monster, but a man. It was Assassin Boy, a masked player who preyed on rich-looking newcomers, and he thought he'd struck gold. The assassin drew his daggers, deciding it was time to go in for the kill. He rushed forward, mockingly declaring to the Kaiser that he was going to enjoy this dinner. Metal clashed with metal as the assassin's blade was blocked solid by the Kaiser's heavy sword. Assassin Boy's eyes widened as he realized that his surprise attack hadn't left even a scratch. Kaiser simply stood there, a dark aura emanating from his body, and stared down at his attacker. Realizing he was in trouble, the assassin tried to jump back and put some distance between them, and then he shouted into the bushes to his partner to stop wasting time and finally finish off the target. An archer from the siege team soared into the air, firing a volley of 3 glowing blue arrows at Kaiser. Kaiser didn't even slow down, effortlessly dispelling the magic arrows with one powerful swing of his two-handed sword. Another member of the group rushed from the side, screaming at the top of his lungs and raising a heavy axe to strike. Kaiser blocked the blow with ease, his eyes burning with a cold, predatory light as the axe scraped against his blade. With a light push, he forced the axeman to stagger back, completely overwhelming him with brute physical force. He gripped the hilt of his massive sword, his movements calm and calculated despite all the chaos. With one swift and brutal movement, Kaiser sliced through the warrior, leaving a trail of blood in the air as he fell to the ground. The remaining attackers froze in place, their faces pale with horror as they realized they were no longer hunters. The assassin boy began to back away, trembling and perplexed at how a rookie could possess such devastating power. A system notification popped up, marking him as a target. He tried to run, but Kaiser was already moving, appearing before him like a ghost in a swift, blurry silhouette. The Kaiser towered over the panicked assassin, his silhouette casting a long, dark shadow that seemed to absorb the light. With a creepy smile on his face, Kaiser looked down at his prey and mockingly asked if he was lost. The scene changed. The protagonist reasoned that wherever he went, there would always be people who simply didn't want to listen. This was not about official duels in the arena, but about unauthorized massacres. In other words, non-RPS existed even during the time of Demrock, and in this game, everything was exactly the same. The reasons varied: fun, loot, or just pure annoyance. But 9 out of 10 players would say the worst was noob hunters who hunted down people who had just left the newbie village, killed them, and took absolutely everything. Exactly the same was this guy standing right in front of the Kaiser, at whom he simply looked with a smile and asked if he had lost his way. The assassin boy froze, his tracking mark just vanishing into thin air. He couldn't figure out how the swordsman managed to use a purely assassin skill like a backstab. Before he could process it, Kaiser dropped him with one clean blow. The rest of the gang soon followed suit. Morons with stupid nicknames. The Kaiser stood over the corpses as the system cleared him of any criminal charges. He realized that Ard was just a fluke due to the newcomer privileges. The guys he met there actually turned out to be unusually decent, but the rest of this world was simply teeming with bastards. He ignored all this chaos and went to collect his rewards for the tasks. The levels began to accumulate as he turned in the completed work. He had officially reached level 17, and the massive western gates had finally opened. Kaiser stood at the threshold, ready to move on. This was Raven's Western Forest. It was a hunting ground so dangerous that even NPCs warned to stay away from it. Unlike the open plains at the Eastern Gate, this place was a nightmare. The forest was dense and visibility was virtually non-existent. It was teeming with goblins and giant insects. Ambush attacks rained down from every blind spot between the trees. The difficulty spike here was absolutely absurd. Naturally, one unspoken rule has taken root for everyone who comes here. It was necessary to assemble a group of at least 3 people. Therefore, the area in front of the Western Gate was filled with people looking for the group. Tanks and soldiers screamed at the top of their lungs, trying to find someone. Most groups were stuck waiting for at least one healer. They were rare because leveling them up was a real pain, and playing them wasn't particularly fun. Several guys noticed that Kaiser was heading towards the gate alone. They assumed he was just another poor fool going to his own funeral. Even the top rankers didn't dare venture into the Western Forest without a full team. They watched him go, wondering who he thought he was. The Kaiser didn't care about their rules and just kept going. Soon the scene shifted and he disappeared into a dark, suffocating thicket. The forest red goblin jumped out at him and was instantly defeated. The Kaiser wasted no time in dispatching the goblins as if they were nothing. Another one tried to ambush him from the branches, but he had already dodged. He brought down the heavy blade with such force that the earth split. The goblin lunged, and Kaiser simply flew into the air. He delivered a powerful kick to the goblin, and the collision created a bright flash of red energy that illuminated the entire forest. The monster landed almost perfectly as the shockwave finished off the stragglers. One goblin was pinned to the ground, coughing up blood, and the game was over for him. The Kaiser swung his sword in a wide arc, sending out a wave of destructive force. Suddenly, he noticed two projectiles flying straight at his head. He didn't even flinch, spinning his blade to deflect them with a circular shield of energy. The goblin archer, watching from the shadows, couldn't believe his eyes. Kaiser looked back, a cold red glow in his eyes. He'd had enough of these games. He tossed the massive sword into the air, using the momentum to power his next strike. The blade sank deep into the goblin, spraying blood everywhere. He caught the handle in midair and prepared for the next round. The system message popped up. The warrior set's effect had just worn off. The remaining goblins saw their chance and swarmed around him. Kaiser didn't look worried. He switched weapons, grabbing the other handle and mentally calling them scum. Thanks to his weapon master trait, all restrictions on weapon use were officially lifted. He activated a backstab, but this time he had a heavy axe in his hands. He plunged the blade up to the hilt into the goblin's skull, ending the fight instantly. The system confirmed that he had just used the axe's basic skill, destruction, and the rest of the goblins attacked him. Then the main character began to spin like a whirlwind, cutting through everyone who came close. The goblins were cut in two as the forest floor turned red. He stood over a pile of corpses as murder notifications filled his screen. His axe mastery jumped to level 2 after this massacre. The Kaiser then put down his sword and checked his list of tasks. The goblins were dealt with, but he still needed to find the pendant. Suddenly, he felt a strong vibration under his feet and looked back. Right behind him, a huge centipede burst out of the ground. The monster towered over him, oozing purple slime and looking hungry. Even with all his experience, Kaiser couldn't help but curse. He clearly hadn't expected this. Deep in the forest, birds suddenly scattered in different directions as something huge moved below. Kaiser soared into the air, coming face to face with a giant forest centipede that towered over the trees. The creature didn't waste a second before lunging straight at him with its massive mandibles. The Kaiser let out a battle cry, putting every ounce of his strength into his next move. He swung his massive blade with all his might, intending to end this quickly. His eyes flashed red as he caught the perfect gap in the monster's armor. The centipede squealed, feeling the deadly pressure directed at it. The Kaiser spun in a deadly circle, his blade cutting through the air with terrifying speed. The blow landed right on the creature's face, crushing its hard shell. The collision created a powerful shockwave, smashing the monster's head into the dirt. GG landed firmly, but was already prepared for the monster's next move. The creature was not yet defeated. It let out another squeal and prepared for a new attack. The Kaiser remained calm, looking at the monster with a cold, calculating focus. He took the monster's attack straight onto his blade, sparks flying from the frantic friction. The centipede's weight alone would have been enough to crush a normal player, but Kaiser stood firm on his feet. Energy crackled around his hands as he pulled out a new weapon from his inventory. He mocked the creature's ugly face before delivering a brutal, decapitating blow. Blood sprayed everywhere as the centipede's head was completely severed from its body. He didn't stop there, bringing the sword down again to finish what he started. The warrior cut through the rest of the armored body with casual precision. The huge insect finally fell silent, and its remains collapsed into a heap. The system rewarded his efforts by raising his swordsmanship to rank 10. Kaiser took a deep breath when the level up notification finally popped up. Dust settled around the mangled carcass of what had once been the zone's fearsome boss. He checked his stats. Level 19, with titles like Speedrun King, was already in his bag. The adventurer began distributing his points to ensure he stayed ahead of the pack. Things were going well, and he'd already cleared most of the quests in the area. He opened his menu to see what remained on his to-do list. There remained a simple quest to find a lost pendant for a girl named Camilla. It wasn't a serious challenge, so he sheathed the blade and set off to complete the mission. He made his way through the forest as night fell, heading towards the mission marker. Ahead, he heard the other players squabbling over who had arrived first. He noticed the tree where the quest item was supposed to be and began to watch from the shadows. At least the line at that hour wasn't too long, which saved him a little time. The Kaiser disappeared into the crowd, trying not to attract attention as he listened to the local chatter. Several players were talking about the kill order issued on griefers. They laughed at the brat assassin, who got what he deserved for showing off. Apparently that guy was going around claiming his name was Kaiser. The protagonist was stunned, because he did not expect his name to come up in such a way so quickly. Players dismissed these rumors as just some fan trying to look cool. They found it incredibly funny that a swordsman would supposedly use backstab skills. The Kaiser decided it was best to lay low for a while until the fuss died down. He knew very well that a swordsman with assassin skills and 6 traits was a walking target. Top guilds will either try to recruit him or simply finish him off before he gets too strong, especially since most of the high-ranking players came from Demrock, and they didn't like competition. If they couldn't control a player like him, they'd do everything in their power to destroy him. He managed to get the lost pendant, crossing it off his to-do list. He needed to finish this task for Camilla quickly, while he was still out of sight. After some time, he headed back to Raven City, remaining incognito as he passed through the gates. Camilla was overjoyed to see him, especially when he returned the jewelry she'd thought was lost forever. The quest concluded, earning him some rewards, and he reached level 20. Camilla was so grateful that she decided to give him her most prized possession. It was a random gift box that could have contained anything from her collection of curiosities. He patted her on the head encouragingly and told her to be more careful with her things. His kindness paid off when a special title was activated, raising his intimacy level with her to the maximum. He moved on, nodding that being nice to NPCs was definitely the way to go in this game. Having completed this quest, Kaiser began searching for something more challenging. His eye was drawn to a rare quest to conquer a dungeon near the Western Gate. The reward included another skill summon ticket, so there was no way he was going to miss out on that. He considered visiting the anthill, but the Goblin Chieftain's lair seemed a more promising option. The Goblin dungeon had the gear he needed, but the catch was that it required a group. He was hesitant to team up with anyone because he didn't want to reveal his unique skills yet. After some time, he arrived at the entrance to the Goblin Chieftain's lair, which was already full of players. Recruitment was in full swing, and everyone was vying with each other to invite high-level fire mages to join them. Merchants and blacksmiths were also on site, helping to profit from the raiding parties. Kaiser was surprised to see so many production-class players gathered in such a dangerous place. A high-level warrior named Bastard Sword rudely refused a thief who was simply looking for a party. He told the guy to get lost, stating that there was no room in their group for a useless class. Bastard Sword and his team eventually managed to convince the female mage to join their ranks. Kaiser watched from the sidelines, realizing that magical damage was the only thing anyone cared about here. In this particular dungeon, mages were treated like gods due to the specifics of the boss fight. He began to worry that a lone swordsman like him wouldn't be able to find a team at all. Suddenly, Bastard Sword noticed him standing nearby and called out to him. He offered Kaiser a place in the band, which seemed odd considering they already had a full lineup. Bastard Sword claimed that their levels were high enough that his class would not be a hindrance to completing the quest. The Kaiser immediately sensed something was wrong and wondered whether he should play along. He decided to accept the invitation, for now, figuring that he could handle whatever they might plot against him. The system confirmed the formation of Bastard Sword's 4-member group. He took a good look at his new teammates, detecting an extremely hostile atmosphere emanating from them. The group's faces twisted into sinister grins as they prepared to enter. Kaiser realized this was no casual invitation. They clearly knew who he was. The scene shifted to a couple of minutes ago. Outside the dungeon, the players were whispering about the high-class warrior who had just arrived. A full warrior's outfit and a two-handed sword. That was definitely him. A group of 3 players watched Kaiser from the sidelines, their leader, Bastard Sword, looking particularly interested. Bastard Sword grinned, his gaze already drawn to Kaiser's rare equipment. The scene shifted again. They arrived at the entrance to the Goblin Chieftain's abode. A system notification explained the dungeon's rare rank and the entry requirements. Inside, Bastard Sword took out a goblin scout with one casual blow. He chuckled, calling the whole thing a trivial matter. Kaiser watched silently, analyzing their strength and teamwork. The system warned them that the leader was sending out his soldiers. A horde of goblins poured out of the darkness, their screeching echoing throughout the cave. Bastard Sword stepped back and suggested that Kaiser take the initiative this time. The female mage, an unrivaled archmage from the top 10, no joke, told him that this was just a chance to see how he would work with the team. Kaiser knew perfectly well what they were doing. They were testing his real skills. He decided to play along with them a little and drew his heavy blade, and then he rushed with lightning speed straight into the ranks of the goblins. Kaiser activated a dash attack, cutting through the enemy front line with a fountain of blood. Bastard Sword watched this with a smug expression. They had indeed found the right man. Shilbius agreed, impressed by the damage Kaiser was doing. The Kaiser moved with incredible speed, dodging every counterattack. Bastard Sword rubbed his chin, Feeling that something was wrong with this warrior's skills, Shieldibius asked him what exactly was bothering him. Kaiser finished off another goblin with a powerful downward strike. Bastard Sword recalled a rumor about an elite assassin who lost to a novice who supposedly relied solely on equipment. The mage girl told him to stop filling his head with nonsense and just focus on the plan to kill him. Bastard Sword agreed. They would finish the job and then deal with him. Shieldibius signaled for the group to move deeper into the tunnels. He warned the others to watch their expressions and act naturally. Kaiser continued to crush the goblin ranks with ease. The swordsman jumped up with mock praise, acting as if he was completely shocked by such a performance. The female mage joined in, claiming that Kaiser could clear the entire dungeon on his own. The Kaiser just smiled and replied that everyone contributes. Shieldibius asked how Bastard Sword had managed to find someone so good. Kaiser's expression turned cold. He saw right through their insolent behavior and bad manners. He realized they were just waiting for an opportunity to abandon him and take his gear. Bastard Sword suggested that they continue on their way, since they had caught their breath. The Kaiser stared back, his gaze sharp. He knew exactly what they were up to, and he wasn't about to give in so easily. The players continued to mow down the goblins with cold efficiency. Shieldibius tried to keep up, pushing the monster back with his massive shield. A sudden burst of magic detonated right next to Kaiser, but he managed to duck in time. Bastard Sword snapped at his mage, telling her to aim properly. She muttered that she had aimed correctly, but the goblin shifted. The three high-level players watched Kaiser with growing concern, wondering if he was just being incredibly lucky. Little did they know that Kaiser had already figured out their attempts to supposedly accidentally hit him from behind. A system alarm sounded. The boss area officially opened as the giant stone doors creaked open. The atmosphere changed when the goblin chieftain discovered intruders entering his domain. Elite soldiers filled the entrance, their stats flashing in a red warning frame. A huge elite goblin leaked out of the darkness with a bone-chilling roar. Bastard Sword saw his chance and ordered Kaiser to deal with the elite while the rest went inside. But Kaiser did not obey orders, but simply disappeared into the shadows, leaving them speechless. Bastard Sword spun around, looking for any sign of the newcomer he thought he was leading. The harsh realization that Kaiser had seen through their plan hit them. The mage pointed ahead and shouted for them to look. Bastard Sword's face paled as the elite goblins surrounded them instead. One of the monsters rushed at the group, forcing them to go on a desperate defense. Shieldibius took the brunt of the impact rocking him as the goblin growled in his face. Bastard Sword shouted at his mage to finish off the creature quickly while he tried to hold the line. The archmage fumbled with her staff, her eyes wide with horror as she began to chant the spell. A massive, flaming boulder began to form above her, its heat distorting the air in the cramped tunnel. She released the spell, and a chaotic explosion of fire and earth shook the cave. The smoke cleared and the magician's face froze in pure horror. A huge redfoot slammed down on the ground, causing the stone to crack. The goblin chieftain appeared before them, his eyes glowing with bloodthirsty intent, and steam hissing from his mouth. The system displayed the boss's traits: cowardice, selfish defense, and vengeance. Tank tried to save the situation by shouting that they would be the first to draw the boss's attention to themselves. He suddenly stopped short, noticing Kaiser walking calmly through all the chaos. The mage girl screamed in a mixture of rage and fear, demanding an answer to how Kaiser had even gotten here. The Kaiser stepped out of the shadows, his massive blade resting casually on his shoulder. He looked them straight in the eyes and asked if they were friends of that assassin guy who had tried to hunt him earlier. As the goblins began to draw closer, the mage tried to pretend to be friendly, offering to put aside their grievances and clear the dungeon together. Kaiser paused, thought for a second, and then agreed that working together sounded like a perfectly reasonable idea. The girl mage began to relax, thinking that she had managed to fool him for the last time. But before she could even blink, blood splattered across the cave walls. Kaiser leaned toward her with a creepy grin and red eyes, giving his final answer. He refused. The system confirmed the kill. Since she was marked as a villain, Kaiser didn't lose karma for killing her. This was exactly what he expected. They hadn't planned on playing fair. He used the skill of stealth takedown from behind to conceal his presence and strike from the shadows. He looked back at the body, surprised that the skill had worked even on someone who was already dead. Ewen screamed in panic that killing their mage had just doomed them all. Kaiser ignored the shouts and asked if the guy knew his motto. Ewen could only stare back in confusion. Gigi's rule was simple. Never team up with scumbags who try to stab you in the back. Anything built on such a foundation is ultimately doomed to rot. Ewen's eyes widened as he recognized the dagger Kaiser was holding. The Kaiser was impressed. He realized so quickly that it was his friend's weapon. Yi-Wen couldn't figure out how the swordsman was using the assassin's weapon, or what he even hoped to do with it. He warned Kaiser that he would never clear the dungeon alone if he killed them. He pointed out the Goblin Chieftain's special defensive stat. The boss completely blocked all physical attacks. Yi-Wen laughed, saying that only the mages were important here, and the dagger was completely useless. Kaiser only mentioned the effects of the condition calmly. He twirled the blade, asking what the guy thought they counted for. Yi-Wen thought he was completely out of his mind if he was planning on relying on something like bleeding. Kaiser clarified that this would not be a normal bleeding effect. The antagonist remained silent. The Kaiser took off, flashing past his target in the blink of an eye. System alerts highlighted the staggering performance differences between the two. Yi-Wen started to say that it wouldn't work, but then suddenly began coughing up blood. The bleeding status triggered, and the damage was colossal, as Kaiser's perception was much higher. His health bar instantly plummeted. Having dropped below 50%, Yi-Wen staggered, unable to comprehend how a level 20 player could surpass him, who was only level 24. He desperately tried to comprehend this gap in power. Kaiser looked down at him, knowing the boy was completely at a loss. He explained that this skill was obtained from a high-level gacha ticket. The rare bleeding skill card indicated that it was only available to rogues and was heavily dependent on stat differences. Kaiser admitted he was actually surprised by one particular feature of this game. Unlike other worlds, negative status effects here actually stacked, even if they were from the same class. Kaiser reflected on the shock people felt when they saw some madman use high-level rogue skills with such precision. Yi-Wen coughed up blood, unable to believe the insane amount of damage coming from a lower-level player. With his last bit of strength, he accused Kaiser of being a hacker. This system confirmed the kill, officially removing Bastard Sword from the game. Gigi just sighed, tired of the predictable excuses that every loser came up with before his death. The paladin screamed in horror as he watched his leader fall. It dawned on him that he was the only one left who had survived this nightmare. He looked at the corpses of his teammates, wondering how their plan to attack Kaiser had gone so horribly wrong. Kaiser's eyes flashed a murderous red. The mistake wasn't the plan, but the idea that they could pull it off. The paladin finally realized they shouldn't have started this fight in the first place. He turned to run, desperately trying to save himself before he became the next victim. But Kaiser moved faster, swinging his blade in a wide, bloody arc. The paladin was knocked to his knees and immediately suffered a bleeding effect. The system noted a massive increase in damage. The guy was hanging by a thread, staring at the floor in absolute shock. Soon, another notification popped up. Player Paladin had been eliminated. The floor of the dungeon became a graveyard for the villains who tried to betray him. Kaiser examined his blade, satisfied that investing 15 points in strength had been the right move. His stats window showed that he had pushed his physical prowess to its limits, hoping it would be enough for what was to come. A huge red-skinned monster loomed in the shadows, watching him. The ground was strewn with the bodies of his fallen subordinates. The Goblin Chieftain let out an earth-shaking roar, enraged by the extermination of his kind. Kaiser looked up, unfazed by the beast's fury. He realized he still had to finish the job and kill the last guy here. A dark smirk played on his lips as he asked if the boss was up for a little fun. The giant beast rushed through the air, intending to crush him. The Kaiser planted his foot on the ground and prepared to counterattack. He delivered a crushing kick straight to the chieftain's jaw. The force of the blow sent teeth and blood flying into the air. He then delivered a lightning-fast slash to the monster's face. The massive red beast tumbled backwards into the mud. The Kaiser stood firmly in place, his eyes narrowed and focused on his prey. Through the thick dust, the leader's eyes began to glow with an ominous yellow light. The boss activated his selfish defense, a feature that made him virtually invulnerable to physical attacks. The Kaiser didn't hesitate, rushing back with even greater speed. He cut a deep gash into the monster's side before it could strike back. The bleeding effect took effect instantly, and the chieftain's health began to rapidly decline. The creature looked around in shock, realizing that it was indeed in danger. Kaiser emerged from the smoke, enveloped in a red, murderous aura. He gripped his dagger tightly, telling the monster it was time to wrap things up. The chief let out a piercing, desperate squeal as the end approached. Seeing his health collapse, the goblin chieftain tucked his tail between his legs and desperately ran away into the darkness of the cave. Kaiser didn't back down for a second, instantly activating his stealthy takedown skill from behind to seal the monster's fate. The chief let out a series of painful breaths, paralyzed with fear at the realization that there was no way out. With a swift, blurry movement, Kaiser found himself right in front of the beast's face, looking at it. With a cold, merciless smile that promised a quick end, He asked where he was going. The boss let out one last, terrified screech. Blood scattered across the walls of the cave. The chieftain collapsed. A system signal sounded, signaling the boss had been defeated and the dungeon cleared. Kaiser leveled up. A rare item dropped, the chieftain's leather belt. He picked it up and smiled. A level 20 rare item was just what he was looking for. He checked his stats. The new gear had given him a significant boost to strength and endurance. He thought that if there was a time limit, he could easily rank high in the rankings. However, not all dungeons had such rules. He turned his attention to the loot left behind by the guys he had just eliminated. He got his hands on a rare shield called a silver iron. These guys must have spent a fortune on their gear. Then he found a training sword belonging to a guy called Bastard Sword. It was a rare plus rank. The name was ironic. He figured the guy was just an avid role player who couldn't actually back up his big words with action. Gigi decided that he would simply sell the rest of his equipment for quick money. Kaiser activated his Eye of Truth and noticed something strange. A strange red light pulsed from the depths of the cave. He wondered if it was grass or something hidden. The light was too intense for a normal plant. The system worked. He had just discovered a hidden dungeon, the hideout of a black goblin shaman. Since he was the first to find it, he earned the title of Competent Explorer. He stared at the glowing red portal, surprised to find a hidden dungeon in such a place. This game world featured a wide variety of dungeons, from standard group dungeons and labyrinths to special event zones. But hidden dungeons were by far the rarest and most difficult to find, remaining locked to most players. Even classes specializing in exploration had difficulty spotting them. They were usually located in impossible places and required very specific conditions for entry. The system confirmed that he was alone and not part of a group. All conditions were met. Kaiser was shocked by how brutal the demands were. Finding a hidden dungeon within a group dungeon required being completely alone. Finding this place without a guide would be a waste of time for anyone else. A dungeon information window popped up. It was a hidden heroic rank dungeon with a single boss. Kaiser smirked as he drew his sword. He definitely wasn't going to let this one slip away. One veteran ranker once compared entering a hidden dungeon to sticking your head into a beast's mouth. Most users thought he was exaggerating, but those who actually found them understood perfectly well what was being discussed. The comparison was simple. What happened when someone stuck their head into the monster's mouth? It snapped shut. The hidden dungeon was exactly the same. It silently waited for its prey to arrive before locking it inside. Once someone crossed the threshold, there was no turning back. Kaiser stepped through the portal and instantly felt the full weight of this dungeon. A dark vortex of energy swirled around him as he entered. The cursed sphere struck him right in the center, inflicting a status effect called Dark Vision. The system warned him that his field of vision would be restricted for a while, but Kaiser's heroic trait kicked in, granting him mental resistance to corruption. He easily shrugged off the dark vision effect. The Kaiser grinned, appreciating the fierce greeting he had just received. A hoarse voice echoed through the cave, demanding to know how the man dared enter his home. The floor began to swarm with the undead, and all eyes turned to the intruder. The undead goblins trudged forward, growling through rotten teeth. The spider zombies joined the swarm, their many eyes glowing purple. Kaiser looked at the decaying monsters and simply found them disgusting. The boss watched from his throne, believing his children had scared the Kaiser to death. The system identified the boss as Jihad Black, a named goblin of heroic rank with necromantic and shamanistic tendencies. Kaiser was surprised to see a named boss so early in the hidden dungeon. He wondered what rewards this enemy would drop. The last high-ranking species he fought netted him quite a tidy sum. Jihad Black stared at him, not understanding how the man had even discovered this place. The shaman didn't sense the explorer's aura on Kaiser, making him a truly bizarre creature. Kaiser noted that for a goblin, the boss turned out to be surprisingly smart. The shaman told him that once he crossed the threshold of this place, there was no turning back. The swarm of undead hissed and screeched, ready to tear him to pieces. Kaiser remained completely relaxed, which only irritated the boss even more. He told the shaman that a ranged fighter must always remain alert when the enemy is close. And then he activated his skill, literally disappearing into thin air before the undead attacked. The boss was caught off guard by Kaiser's sudden movement. Jihad activated corpse control, and his speed increased thanks to the Nimble Fingers ability. He triggered the corpse's explosion by turning his own minions into bombs. The shaman laughed, thinking he had caught the man in the blast wave, but his expression turned to pure shock when Kaiser emerged unharmed. He couldn't understand how anyone could move so fast. Kaiser stood a few feet away from him, surrounded by a red aura. He held a blood-stained dagger, having already managed to strike. The shaman was stunned to discover that he had already been inflicted with the bleeding effect. Kaiser asked if he was surprised, reminding his boss that he should have stayed on his toes. The enraged shaman called him a small rat and summoned even more corpses. The goblin bastard just wanted to see how long this pathetic human could keep this fight going. Kaiser dodged the massive purple blast, his gaze focused on his opponent's furious movements. Jihad Black continued to frantically chant as purple energy swirled furiously around his hands. The cave floor shook from a series of explosions, but Kaiser navigated the chaos with his usual ease. Kaiser's eyes lit up, reading every tiny movement the boss made. He could see everything in the palm of his hand. To Jihad Black, this man was just another soul to be consumed, yet he was unable to land a blow. The boss believed his undead minions had the boy cornered, but Kaiser was simply waiting for the perfect moment to attack. Jihad shouted that it was over, confident that his final combination spell had finally lured his prey into the trap. A system signal sounded as the boss prepared a truly devastating attack. The great corpse explosion. Jihad Black gloated, thinking Kaiser was dead, but a system message showed that his target marker had disappeared. A shadow loomed behind the shaman, causing the victorious grin to fade from his face as he realized he was no longer alone. Kaiser's voice whispered right in his ear, mocking his failure. He wondered if his skill had missed. Before the boss could even turn around, Kaiser's fist landed hard on his jaw. The force of the blow sent the goblin shaman tumbling backwards across the uneven stone floor. Jihad Black wheezed as green ichor dripped from his mouth, trying unsuccessfully to comprehend the man's speed. The Kaiser stood over his fallen enemy with an expression of cold, bored indifference. A dark, fiery aura began to emanate from Kaiser, making him look like a bigger monster than the boss himself. The shaman managed to mutter a threat of revenge, his green eyes widening in horror. Kaiser didn't give him a single chance to recover, delivering a brutal blow that made the boss's whining subside. He then delivered another blow to the face, determined to end this semblance of a fight as quickly as possible. A flurry of blows rained down on the boss, each one landing with sickening force. Jihad Black screamed for mercy, begging for a break as Kaiser hesitated, his hands stained with green blood. The boss started whining about foul play, clutching his face and lamenting that hitting the bones was against the rules. Kaiser stared at the pathetic, whining creature, wondering what kind of boss he was actually fighting. He looked genuinely disappointed, wondering how such a non-entity could be considered of heroic rank. A sudden explosion thundered behind Kaiser, but he remained calm, analyzing the shaman's true power. He realized that although the spells were powerful, the boss himself was surprisingly fragile and cowardly. The boss jumped back as if he had just successfully pulled off a grand scam against our protagonist. Looking back, Kaiser found this maneuver completely puzzling. Had he not beaten him enough yet? Or was this creature truly delusional, thinking it could still escape his grasp? Jihad Black began laughing hysterically, disappearing into a veil of dark smoke. He called him a foolish man. A system alert warned Kaiser that the boss was manifesting a new hidden trait, the bloodline factor. The notification explained that once the manifestation was complete, the shaman's stats would increase dramatically. Kaiser's eyes narrowed as he realized the threat level was about to jump from heroic to heroic plus. Realizing that he couldn't allow the boss to reach his full potential, Kaiser drew the massive sword from his back. He couldn't just leave him alone, he thought. Kaiser rushed forward like a crimson flash, his speed and strength augmented by his determination to end this fight quickly. System notifications filled his vision, confirming that the warrior set bonus was active and provided a significant damage boost against goblin-type enemies like Jihad Black. With his massive blade raised high, Kaiser prepared to deliver the finishing blow. His thoughts focused on the one fundamental truth of combat. The impact of his strike proved catastrophic, causing a blinding explosion of energy as the additional damage bonus from his Fury effect applied to the boss. Jihad Black stared in disbelief as his transformation was interrupted by pure, primal power, unable to comprehend how a human could possess such overwhelming strength. The Kaiser's eyes glowed an unyielding red light as he pronounced his final judgment. In the face of truly devastating damage, all enemies were equal. The final blow cut through the darkness. Jihad Black let out a final scream before being completely obliterated. The system confirmed the dungeon's clearing. Kang Du-yun, the Kaiser, stood victorious as the achievement was recorded in his adventure book. A pillar of light announced a level increase along with a loot drop. He obtained a heroic rank Vengeful Spirit Sphere from the shaman. Next came the Shaman's Robe, another heroic rank item that concealed its wearer's face. Kaiser inspected the new cloak, impressed by its high-ranking accolades. It was a bit of an odd piece of equipment, but he didn't complain. Then the situation became strange due to an unidentified item called the Trace of the Forgotten Clan. He had seen similar things in his past life, but their purpose still remained a mystery. He brushed it aside for now, as something else had caught his attention. It turned out to be an unidentified card. In this game, cards were used for everything from skills to enchantments. Even powerful boss monsters turned into cards after they were defeated. Kaiser took a closer look at his newest acquisition. It was the Jihad Black card, a heroic rank item that allowed the boss to be summoned as a guardian. Guardians were essentially personal bodyguards for players. These were typically creatures such as fire salamanders or stone golems. The Kaiser was not jumping for joy yet, since most of them were useless. Unless the player was a top ranker with legendary beasts, they usually just sucked gold. Nevertheless, he pressed the summon button to see what he was dealing with. Flashes of energy crackled, and a tiny, pitiful-looking goblin leaped out. It was Jihad Black, a heroic rank. His loyalty was a fat 0. Most of his skills were also blocked because his level was too low. The kid wasn't happy about the situation either. Immediately yelling at Kaiser, he stared down at the runt, wondering if he had been shortchanged. He expected something majestic, like a Pegasus. But not this. Jihad was already throwing a tantrum over becoming the servant of a lousy man. He simply remained on the ground, lamenting his unfortunate fate. Kaiser reread the traits. Opportunist, strong against the weak. Essentially, it was a list of alarm bells. A system warning popped up. His loyalty was so low it was dangerous. The goblin glared at him, clearly already planning a stab in the back. Kaiser's eye twitched. This was going to be a problem. He decided right then and there that he couldn't let this slide. He took a step towards the cowering goblin. Jihad tried to play it cool, demanding to know what the man wanted. That was an unfortunate choice of words. Master Kaiser was not particularly patient. He loomed over the short man, his gaze turning icy. The goblin realized that he had just screwed up big time. Kaiser cracked his knuckles with a menacing grin. It was time for an aggressive retraining, starting with 1 strike per second. Jihad Black began to sweat as events took a turn for the worse. Kaiser cracked his knuckles with a menacing grin. It was time for some aggressive retraining. The little goblin screamed in terror as the master approached him. A chorus of pained screams echoed throughout the deep, dark cave. Strange system messages surfaced. The more the Kaiser beat him, the more his loyalty actually grew. It was a truly strange trait. Outside the game, the sun was setting over the city. Do-yun took off his headset and stretched, finally ending the long session. He stretched out his arms and looked out the window, noticing that it was already starting to get dark. He walked into the living room and checked the dinner situation. His younger sister, Kang Ji-hoon, was already idly eating potato chips. Ji-hoon just continued chewing, telling him that their mother was not home right now. Do-yun stared at her, a little irritated by her lazy energy. He asked her what she was watching on TV. It turned out to be GOS. Do-yun was shocked to find out that his sister was actually playing the same game. She stated that absolutely everyone plays it these days, and admitted that she has already reached level 71. Do-yun couldn't believe it. 71? Her level was higher than he expected. He asked her how long it had taken her to swing to get that far. Ji-hoon told him it had been about 6 months. A friend offered to help her level up, so she simply continued playing. 6 months to get to 70? Do-yun began to do the calculations in his head. She added that she doesn't spend 10 hours a day on it, like some losers. Do-yun just stared at her, feeling like this was a stone thrown at him. The TV news switched to a story about the Hero Guild. Ji-hoon immediately perked up. Do-yun wondered if they really were something important. She explained that they are incredibly popular at the moment, especially among people their age. This did not convince him, and he nodded at the fact that they did not even make it into the top 10 of the rankings. The screen showed the guild leader, Verse, a man with long blue hair and shining golden armor. Ji-hoon admitted it was mainly because of him, because he's a real hottie. Apparently, the girls preferred his pretty face to his actual fighting ratings. Do-yun chuckled, thinking that the guy looked more like a pop star than a warrior. Ji-hoon spoke enthusiastically about how handsome he was, putting him on a whole other level. Do-yun just rolled his eyes as she continued to drool at the screen. He stood up, deciding it was time to go to the gym instead of listening to all this. But Ji-hoon mentioned how popular the guild leader's new YouTube channel was. Do-yoon froze in his tracks. She said that now, all the major players are making videos, sometimes getting up to 100 million views. Do-yoon's heart practically skipped a beat. This was a colossal audience. He asked her if that meant he was making a fortune. Ji-hoon replied that she'd heard he made around 1 billion won a year. 1 billion won. Do-yoon's brain immediately began calculating how many servings of fried chicken he could buy with that. He began muttering this number under his breath as he walked away. Ji-hoon watched him go, puzzled by what had suddenly come over her brother. He just kept repeating it, completely immersed in his own world. He headed straight to his room and slammed the door. Ji-hoon was left alone, seriously puzzled by his behavior. Once inside, Do-yoon jumped back into the game capsule and initiated the login sequence. Returning to the world of GOS, Kaiser decided he was going to start recording absolutely everything. Since people were making billions, he too intended to get his piece of the pie. Jihad Black was waiting for him right there as soon as Kaiser stepped over the threshold of the dungeon. The Kaiser noticed that the little one was already skipping formalities. The goblin quickly tried to correct himself, but Kaiser told him to simply use whatever name he found convenient. The Kaiser pulled out some spare equipment and tossed it to his new servant. He explained that he couldn't use it yet anyway, and it wouldn't hurt for the goblin to look the part. Jihad was extremely pleased with the gift, but oddly enough, his loyalty stat actually dropped a little. The Kaiser immediately became angry. He couldn't understand why loyalty was diminished by a gift. The goblin burst into thanks, and the loyalty points soared back up as quickly as they had fallen. Kaiser sighed, realizing that the short man's loyalty was about as stable as a rubber band. Now wearing a dark hooded cloak, Jihad inquired about their next destination. The Kaiser grinned confidently, telling him that they were in for a good run. Jihad looked a little confused, not quite understanding what his master had in mind. The pair began to cut their way through the forest, leaving a trail of defeated monsters behind. System messages confirmed that they had easily defeated the Red Goblin and the Giant Spider. Jihad looked down on the carnage, pretending to feel sorry for the poor creatures they had just exterminated. The Kaiser rested his massive, bloody sword on his shoulder and beckoned the goblin to him. He gestured for the little one to hurry. It was time for a different kind of lesson. Seeing the master's order, the short man immediately rushed over and appeared before him without delay. Kaiser sat down on a log and ordered Jihad to collect the loot and also try necromancy on the corpses. Jihad immediately set to work, throwing aside the monster's weapons. He stood over the fresh goblin corpse, ready to see if he could bring it back to life. He began a strange rhythmic spell as dark purple energy began to swirl across the clearing. The dead goblin's eyes glowed an ominous purple as he was forcibly brought back to some semblance of life. The Kaiser watched this with genuine surprise. Melkam had actually managed to pull it off. Jihad proudly showed off his small squad of 3 goblin zombies, though he admitted that he had reached his limit for now. The Kaiser was impressed. Having a small army to do menial tasks promised to be incredibly useful. The undead slaves let out a series of shrill cries, awaiting the next order. Suddenly, 3 undead goblins rushed away into the dark forest. The Kaiser was left perplexed, wondering where they were headed. He asked his guard what exactly he had ordered them to do. Jihad grinned cheekily, explaining that he had simply told them to go and collect all the loot for them. The Kaiser was half irritated, half impressed. The goblin was already actively shifting his responsibilities onto others. He began to wonder how much longer it would take to reach the next level. He needed bigger goals. Jihad perked up at the mention of elite mobs, stating that he knew perfectly well where they usually hung out. Kaiser froze in place. He hadn't expected the goblin to possess such information. The goblin explained that those elite guys were lazy and just gathered in one specific place all day. A creepy, wide grin spread across Kaiser's face. A whole group of elite monsters just sitting there, waiting to be farmed? Totally nuts. The 2 of them headed deeper into the forest to track down the camp. And indeed, there was a whole flock of them just relaxing by the fire. They watched the area from the bushes, while Jihad made sure that this was the target his master wanted. The Kaiser just grinned. This was even better than he expected. Just as he was looking out for them, a notification popped up about a new quest, the Trial of Warriors. The rewards were substantial. 100 gold pieces, a decent chunk of experience, and an intermediate skill draw ticket. Kaiser was ready to go all in. One of the goblins was just trying to enjoy his lunch when he realized something had gone wrong. The Kaiser didn't give him a chance to react and rushed straight into the middle of the camp. He greeted them briefly with a smirk just before the carnage began. The goblin roared and swung his sword, but Kaiser was already 2 steps ahead. He leaped over the blow with ease, making the monster's best efforts look clumsy. He landed on the run, already choosing his next target to destroy. The monster barely had time to feign shock, as a boot flew straight at his head and a powerful kick landed right on his jaw. Blood and teeth flew as the goblin staggered back from the blow. The rest of the pack tried to pile on him, but Kaiser was just getting warmed up. He pulled out his dagger as electricity crackled along the blade, preparing the skill. Using the vital injection, he rushed through the crowd, leaving behind a trail of cuts. One poor guy took the blow so hard that he immediately suffered a bleeding effect. Kaiser kept up the momentum, cutting through another pair of monsters as they fell. It was then that one of the larger warriors rushed into battle, screaming at the top of his lungs. He brought the massive blade down, but Kaiser parried it flawlessly with just his dagger. Sparks flew from the impact as he stopped the heavy thrust dead in its tracks. The monster was stunned that a human could actually match its primal strength. The Kaiser followed up with a crushing blow that sent the warrior crashing into the dirt. The goblin coughed up blood, realizing that he was completely outmatched. The Kaiser decided it was time to stop playing games and reached for the massive sword on his back. He drew his heavy blade, ready to end this hunt. The warrior let out a last desperate roar as the sword's shadow fell upon it. Kaiser's eyes lit up with a dark light as he focused all his power into the final swing. A powerful vertical slash cut through the air, painting the stage red. The monster was finished before it could make a sound. The Kaiser stood alone in the center of this carnage, his sword firmly planted in the ground. Jihad Black watched from the bushes, completely horrified by this show of force. He realized right there that the guy he was serving was definitely not human. For the little guard, Kaiser was not just a master. He was a real devil. Kaiser plunged his sword into the ground, finally finishing off the warm-up mobs. He decided that the time had come for a real test to appear. As if on cue, a massive blue goblin charged in with a roar, swinging a giant axe. The system confirmed that he had encountered a hidden field boss named Karuk. The quest Trial of Warriors immediately transitioned into Trial of the Great Warrior. Kaiser merely smirked. He saw before him not a boss, but a walking sack of loot. Karuk brought his axe down, splitting the ground where Kaiser had stood just a second ago. But Kaiser was already meters away, easily dodging the blow. The two of them came face to face as the boss prepared another powerful swing. Jihad Black panicked in the background, certain that his master was about to be crushed. Karuk's axe began to glow with an icy aura, threatening to shatter everything it touched. The system announced that Karuk had activated his merciless strike. The boss roared, bringing down the glowing axe with all the might he had. The very air seemed to scream under the pressure of this attack. Karuk put all his weight into that one punch to finish the fight. Jihad could hardly watch, convinced it was too much for Kaiser to bear. The Kaiser just stood there with his eyes blazing, preparing his counterattack. There was that confident grin on his face. He knew exactly what he was doing. The blue giant was confident that victory was his. He let out a final roar as the axe came within inches of Kaiser's head. Kaiser tightened his grip on the handle, timing his movement to the millisecond. The two weapons collided with a powerful explosion of blue sparks. Kaiser parried the blow flawlessly, matching the boss's crushing power. Jihad couldn't believe his eyes. His master was actually holding back a boss-level ultimate attack. Kaiser didn't just block the blow, he redirected the full force of the attack. With a successful parry, he sent the boss's entire momentum to the wind. The system explained that this skill could neutralize even legendary attacks if the moment was chosen correctly. It was a technique known for surpassing normal defensive skills. In skilled hands, it was an impotent way to overwhelm any opponent. But because it was so difficult to pull off, almost no one even tried to use it in practice. Kaiser was simply glad that such a useful skill was left out of the low-ranking draw. Now that the merciless blow had been parried, Karuk was left completely open. The shockwave from the reflection threw everything back in a blinding flash of light. Now it was the Kaiser's turn to go on the offensive. Karuk finally looked horrified as he realized his best move had just failed. Kaiser mockingly asked if his skills were on recharge. The boss let out a desperate cry as Kaiser prepared the finishing blow. Jihad was left shaking, finally realizing that the man he served was a true monster. One heavy chop to the neck, and the fight was finally over. Karuk collapsed in the mud, and the system confirmed the test had been passed. Now it's time for the good stuff. 200 gold, a ton of experience, and a couple of skill raffle tickets. 2 intermediate tickets for the drawing. Kaiser looked like he just won the lottery. He literally jumped for joy in the middle of the dark forest. His companions simply hid behind a tree, harshly condemning him. Seriously, how could a guy look like a pure demon in 1 second, and the next, like an idiot? Kaiser was too busy psyching himself up for the prank to care. He wasted no time and pressed the use button. Summon cards began to fly everywhere in a flash of light. The first catch was Rising Dragon Kick, a rare martial arts skill for the legs. Then he pulled out Striking. It turned out to be a rare buff skill, which was a bit odd for his class. Gigi didn't expect this to be the drop. He received a powerful attack buff with no cooldown. Essentially, this turned his normal blade into a heavy-hitting two-handed sword. He tried to hide his excitement, but it was a solo player's dream. A damage dealer that could buff himself? Everything fell into place. But he wasn't finished yet. He still needed to inspect Karuk's leather gear. It was a full set of heroic-grade items, including even the ring and shoulder pads. Finally, he could get rid of that basic goblin set he had been wearing all this time. No hesitation. He got everything ready in one go. Frankly, the new outfit looked pretty neat. Plus, the set bonuses gave him a huge boost to his stats and range. He started posing, asking his companion if the new look suited him. The short man simply stared. To him, his master was becoming more and more terrifying with each passing minute. The Kaiser noticed the look and turned with a grin. Playing tough, he said that even he himself was afraid of how far he was going to go. At that moment, he really was radiating the energy of the protagonist. The companion simply thought he was a complete lunatic. A notification suddenly popped up that the companion's loyalty had just dropped. Kaiser stopped and asked if he had really just insulted him in his head. The shorty panicked and started waving his hands in denial. The Kaiser drew his sword with a terrifying expression, threatening to kill him for any misstep. It worked as intended. Loyalty immediately returned to its previous level while the companion bowed. The Kaiser merely sighed. Keeping the servants in line was proving to be hard work. The protagonist decided it was time to move on. He'd acquired new equipment and skills, so it was time to put them to use. A small companion trotted behind him, asking where his master was going. The answer was simple. They were going boss hunting. The companion was all for it. Since Kaiser had already defeated the Great Warrior, he figured that a few more bosses wouldn't be a problem. But then he realized how serious Kaiser was about this next hunt. The system made it clear. To reach the next city, he first needed to pass the continent's test. And this test was no joke. He needed to reach level 24 and defeat the notorious Spider Queen Eliza. They reached the Western Forest, and the place turned out to be covered in a giant sticky web. There was already a crowd of players there, checking their watches, and waited for the boss to respawn. Everyone tried to guess where she would appear this time. Based on where it had appeared in the past, Kaiser looked around, searching for any clue. He walked through the crowd as if he owned the place, keeping his head down so as not to attract attention. He asked his companion if he knew the specific places where the queen would be reborn, but the shorty couldn't remember anything. Apparently, this boss was from the next generation, whom he didn't know. The Kaiser only sighed at how well his companion knew every inch of the forest. The companion looked a little embarrassed at having let his master down. The Kaiser peered into the massive trees, wondering where the queen was really hiding. He had a plan to burst in the second she showed her face. Suddenly, his killer feature kicked in, and the system revealed the exact location where Eliza was hiding. Kaiser was stunned. He hadn't even expected this feature to work in such a situation. He noted that he didn't even have the title of Spider-specific killer yet. Then it dawned on him. The special ability didn't just apply to bosses he'd killed before. She worked on absolutely all of their varieties. He thought back to the bosses he had already crushed. This feature was literally a cheat code for finding hidden targets. He waved off his surprise. Why dwell on good things? A sinister grin spread across his face. This meant the chance to kill the boss earlier, before anyone else would even know he was there. While the other players stood there in confusion, Kaiser made his move. He found a hidden entrance to a cave, from where an eerie voice was shouting a name over and over again. He stepped over the threshold, and the system confirmed that he had finally encountered the Spider Queen, Eliza. He couldn't believe it. The plan had actually worked flawlessly. The companion was absolutely stunned. He had no idea how Kaiser had found this hidden place so quickly. The Kaiser simply told him to relax and enjoy the easy pickings. Then they saw her in the darkness. This creature was absolutely enormous. Eliza was more than just a big bug. She was an elite field boss with deadly venom and spider-like sensors. The spider screeched, screaming her own name into the cave. Kaiser's expression changed. It was time to get to work. The queen struck out with her massive paws, but she was too slow for him. Kaiser activated his back grab skill, ready to move in from behind her. He disappeared and reappeared right in her blind spot. The spider realized too late that her enemy had moved behind her. Kaiser charged his new skill, and a massive golden dragon began to spiral around him. He unleashed the rising dragon's attack, gaining a nice bonus to damage from his gear. The blow was brutal. The spider screamed in pain as the blow landed. Kaiser's eyes glowed with a furious golden light as the energy from his attack surged around him. The spider landed hard, and the force of its fall cracked the cave floor. Without a second's rest, Gigi began to move again, rushing through the dark hall. Eliza looked stunned, barely able to keep up with his speed. The Kaiser unleashed a flurry of lightning-fast slashes that lit up the cave. He slowed down, already preparing his next skill, and then he rushed forward again, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Kaiser activated the attack buff, and his attack power skyrocketed. Enveloped in orange energy, he charged back into the fray. Eliza stared back with wide, glowing eyes, while Kaiser unleashed another attack of the rising dragon. The golden dragon broke free from this attack, dwarfing the enormous boss with her size. The blow landed squarely on her head, sending shockwaves through the room. Eliza screamed in agony as green goo sprayed from her mandibles. The Kaiser finished the job, bringing her down with crushing force. From the shadows, the companion watched this absolute massacre, mentally calling Kaiser a real devil. Eliza lay prostrate on the floor while Kaiser stood over her, cold and indifferent. The Spider Queen continued to sob her own name, her eyes filling with tears. The Kaiser didn't care about the name. He was focused solely on the kill. He smirked, clenching his fist and preparing to finish the job. Eliza just kept shouting Liza's name over and over again. The companion watched as Kaiser continued his assault, looking more and more confused with each passing second. Seeing the boss being bullied like that made the little spirit feel a pang of pity. Kaiser did not stop, raining down a hail of blows on the defenseless spider. But then that name? It began to seem incredibly familiar to the spirit. Suddenly, everything fell into place, and the companion's eyes widened in shock. Kaiser stopped mid-swing, wondering what the hell was going on. The companion jumped out of the shadows, begging Kaiser to wait and stop. The Kaiser was simply confused, wondering why he was interfering now. The spirit ran straight towards the spider, screaming her name with tears in his eyes. Eliza slowly opened her eyes, focusing on the small creature in front of her. He begged her to recognize him, his voice shaking with emotion. Tears welled up in the Spider Queen's eyes when she realized who it was. The scene was transported back 150 years to a time when a hooded goblin roamed the forest. He froze in place when he heard a tiny sound coming from a nearby leaf. He found a tiny red spider sitting there, looking straight at him. He picked it up, fascinated by the rare little creature he had stumbled upon. Cassiar asked the tiny spider if she wanted to go with him. She squeaked her name back, sounding incredibly happy. Lisa. He thought the name Lisa sounded pretty good as they settled into his cabin. But after some thought, he suggested Eliza instead, considering her original name too simple. The little spider disagreed, squeaking her name over and over again in protest. He laughed, saying that she just needed to get used to being called Eliza. In the end, he simply gave in, although he still insisted on his version of the name. One day, Cassiar took his cloak and told her that he needed to go on a solo mission. Lisa looked at him with her big eyes, clearly wanting to follow him. He refused her, explaining that the path ahead was too dangerous for her to go with him. He gave her a final smile and promised to return before she could come to her senses. Lisa watched from the table as he walked out the door, never to be seen again. Days turned into weeks, but her master never returned. The sun and moon replaced each other again and again, but the door remained locked. The sunlight slowly gave way to thick dust and cobwebs as the seasons flowed from one to the next. 1 year turned into 10, and 10 turned into 100 years, but Eliza kept waiting. Finally, when even the wooden walls of the hut grew tired of waiting, Eliza headed back into the western forest, returning to the very spot where she first met her master. She spent decades there, constantly repeating the name he gave her so as to never forget it. Back to the present day, the companion was absolutely heartbroken, crying over the Spider Queen. The Kaiser looked at him, asking point blank if he was the one who abandoned her. The little spirit was too overcome with grief to even formulate a response. He simply continued to mourn her name, while Kaiser watched with a calm, cold expression on his face. The Kaiser pressed him, wondering why he had remained hidden for 150 years instead of returning. The companion lowered his gaze, admitting that the truth was beyond his strength to express at the moment. The Kaiser stared at him, clearly not satisfied with such a vague answer. The spirit merely offered a silent apology to his new master. Kaiser sighed, looking back at the Spider Queen as he considered his options. He was in a tight spot. It was a graduation quest, and he needed to kill her to move on. The spirit remained close to her, but Eliza seemed to be trying to convey something last. Suddenly, the spirit shuddered and his eyes widened in utter shock. Eliza let out one last pain-filled cry, calling out for her master, her eyes filled with sorrow. The companion screamed in refusal, as if he could not bear the request he had just heard. Kaiser asked what had happened and what exactly the spider had told him. The companion turned back, his eyes glowing an ominous green as he said that she was asking to be killed. Hearing this, Kaiser fell into a state of absolute bewilderment, trying to figure out the spider's plan. Jihad tried to stop the spider and dissuade her from her own desire, but wanting to die, Lisa began to bite herself, and green blood immediately appeared in the air. Kaiser watched as the monster self-destructed, and the goblin kept screaming her name, trying to stop it. Kaiser was stunned to see a system notification that the field boss's health had dropped to critical levels. Jihad continued to stretch out his trembling hands, asking his dying friend why he was doing this. He kept trying to stop her, but he couldn't. Finally, the spider Lisa turned to her master and quietly said something. The next words caught Kaiser off guard. The goblin shared a quiet, painful farewell with the spider, and then begged his master to hurry. Suddenly, Jihad shouted at Kaiser to hurry up and finish her off, leaving our protagonist completely shocked by such a cold-blooded request. Kaiser asked if it was really okay to kill his girlfriend, feeling a wave of guilt at even the thought. Jihad assured him that all was well, urging him to strike before the opportunity slipped through his fingers. Our guy decided to trust the kid, slowly unsheathing the blade and mentally preparing for the final blow. He raised his blade, and then he plunged his sword deep into the monster, officially recording the kill in his adventure book. He stood over the fallen beast and exchanged a silent glance with his companion, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The Kaiser inquired if this was indeed the right move, to which Jihad gave a shaky but confident confirmation of their actions. They both looked at the aftermath of the battle, wondering what would happen now that the queen of this nest was no longer there. Suddenly, the boss's true form emerged from the darkness, as a legendary type parasite seeking a new host. The system asked the protagonist if he was ready to take the spider under his command. Gigi remembered that these entities are famous for capturing the bodies of massive dragons and hydras to use as their personal vessels, which greatly annoyed the players. Kaiser watched Jihad hold the tiny spider and thought about how lucky he was to have such a rare subordinate. The system confirmed that Eliza had officially become a named guardian with maximum loyalty and unique parasitic abilities. Our protagonist began to put the pieces of the puzzle together and realized that Jihad was actually a much more valuable asset than he thought. The goblin turned out to be a real magnet for secret locations with rare items, and apparently powerful subordinates who simply fell into their hands. Kaiser realized that he had essentially found the ultimate good luck charm and began to break into a villainous grin. The Kaiser couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement at the thought of how much profit this goblin could bring him. And Jihad noticed the change in the atmosphere, and he immediately had a very bad feeling because of that creepy look. A tiny parasitic spider suddenly leaped from the goblin's hands, darting through the air with astonishing speed. She landed right on Kaiser's shoulder, startling him a little. The guy didn't understand what she wanted, but Lisa kept sitting on his shoulder and screaming. Jihad laughed and explained that she just wanted to say thank you for her help and for giving her a new purpose in life. The kid added that she asked them to follow her deeper into the cave to find more prey. With a new ally on his shoulder and a lucky goblin at his side, Kaiser strode forward to collect his rewards. The tiny spider then settled comfortably on the shoulder of her new owner. They followed their new guide and descended deeper into the cave to find the treasures that awaited them. All this time, the little spider was trying to talk to the main character, but he didn't understand her. But finally, the goblin saved him, saying that they had already arrived. And then the protagonist finally stopped, because the duo had finally reached the bottom of the pit. And after going a little further, I discovered a secret location that was hidden from everyone else. They had stumbled right into the heart of the Spider Queen's incubator, where countless babies were waiting to emerge from their cocoons. Kaiser stared at the massive web swarms, wondering if he had just walked into a death trap or a gold mine. Our guy didn't look at all scared because he knew this was exactly the challenge he needed. A new quest had appeared, tasking our hero with defeating the official boss, Spider Queen Eliza. Kaiser thought to himself that he had to act smartly to deal with so many enemies at once. With a wicked grin on his face, our protagonist drew his blade and let his dark aura flare. This way, he wanted to test whether his judgments were correct or not. Jihad watched in complete shock as a massive beam of energy erupted from the ground as the battle began. Every spider in the room rushed forward at once, trying to overwhelm our guy with numbers before he could even move. These monsters were fast, but they had no idea who they were actually facing in that dark cave. Kaiser leaped straight into the middle of the swarm, sword raised high, ready to wreak havoc. A powerful explosion of power shook the entire incubator as our guy unleashed his full might on the first wave of enemies. The blade cut through the thick shells as if they were made of paper, and green blood splashed across the walls of the cave. The young warrior became a literal whirlwind of death, spinning through the air and slashing at every monster in sight with his glowing blade. Kaiser didn't stop for a second, continuing his rampage, making Jihad realize that his master was incredibly strong. The sheer speed of his attacks left nothing but a blur of brutality and the sounds of monsters being destroyed. Jihad watched the carnage and thought that his master was on a completely different level of power. After a grueling battle that left everything around splattered with the green blood of monsters, the Kaiser finally killed the beast for good, and the system confirmed his complete victory. The remains of his enemies dripped from his sword. As soon as the system notifications of confirmation began pouring in, he had reached the highest possible rank. He was awarded the title of Best Graduate for his insane performance at the test. Kaiser just chuckled to himself, rubbing his head, because his stats received a huge boost thanks to the time-lapse effect. The Kaiser took a deep breath and admitted that the rewards he had just received were far beyond anything he could have imagined. Jihad pointed across the cave and explained to the owner that this was not all, and Lisa had one more special reward in store for him. Kaiser suddenly noticed a strange red light ahead. The goblin told him exactly what to do. He needed to go there or walk there. At this time, the light continued to reflect off the walls, which made him stop dead in his tracks. Our protagonist stood in shock as he read the system notification that he had just discovered the legendary Fate Gem. Then his aura suddenly activated, and he stood forward in shock because the fragment of fate as a reward was of great interest to him. The scene suddenly changed, and the group of hunters stood before a dark cave covered in thick cobwebs. They searched the area and were convinced this was the final boss's lair. The leader pointed a finger into the darkness, calling for his squad to destroy the Spider Queen Eliza and then meet back in the city. Everyone was fired up and eager to fight. The entire team erupted in loud cheers, raising their fists in the air. They were ready to claim the glory and loot for killing the boss. Suddenly, a blue system screen appeared in front of them, announcing that the Spider Queen Eliza had already been defeated. The guild members began whispering in panic, wondering if another top guild had managed to slip past them. This was supposed to be their moment to shine. One of the guys opened the real-time rankings and realized that the data had just been updated. He gasped when he saw that a top player had just received an achievement for that kill. The confusion on their faces was absolutely priceless. Everyone leaned in closer to see the name of the man who had stolen their thunder, while the guy with the screen tried to scroll through the data. It was Kaiser. Inside the cave, the main character's hand clutched a glowing red crystal, radiating pure power. This was the very prize. Our guy Kaiser stared at the gem, wondering why he had just received a class quest called Destiny's Legacy. His little goblin friend Jihad was overjoyed that Kaiser was finally no longer just an unemployed vagabond. The Kaiser plopped down on the ground to catch his breath, while his little companion hovered nearby, waiting for the next important announcement. He asked the main character why he was so sad. Did something happen? Then Kaiser replied that he just had a bad feeling, and the goblin pointed to the new reward. The system revealed that the quest reward was a legendary item known as Cassiar's Relic. The little goblin started screaming at the top of his lungs with happiness because Kaiser finally got a rare item like all the other players. Kaiser snapped back, pointing out the insane penalty for failure, which would literally turn him into a non-player character, NPC. Our protagonist clutched his head in stress, realizing that everything he had built up to this point could disappear in the blink of an eye. The pressure was simply unreal. But suddenly a new idea came into his head. He looked at his companion and asked what would happen to the goblin if the class was lost. Jihad put on a grand show of fake indignation, screaming about how the Kaiser could ever doubt his absolute loyalty. However, the system revealed that his loyalty was incredibly low. The Kaiser merely gave him an impassive look as the goblin broke out in a cold sweat. He knew exactly what the kid was thinking. Our guy had decided to accept the quest just to spite him, and Jihad's loyalty only went up 1 point. Kaiser realized that taking on this new quest meant surviving a brutal test to prove that he was truly worthy of Cassiar's power. He remembered defeating the iron-blooded demon dragon and reasoned that since he had survived that, he could handle anything this challenge would throw at him. With a determined look, he pressed the confirmation button on the system screen. It was time to crush any monster that stood in his way and claim his prize. The scene shifted back to the beautiful church, where Kaiser recalled how it all began. He had previously drawn the Cassiar card as a hidden figure. Inside the cathedral, the priest was absolutely losing his temper, pointing and shouting at our protagonist. The Kaiser responded with a cheeky wink and a grin. He thought he'd done the village a favor, but they clearly felt differently. In response to an offer to save a local village in exchange for a simple blessing, the priest responded by pouring a bucket of water directly on his head. The priest shouted at him to be silent, calling him the pathetic apostle Cassiara, who had somehow dared to come here in an impious guise. The Kaiser shouted back, demanding his reward before leaving. But the priest declared that there was nothing for someone like him and slammed the door. The Kaiser left the cathedral in a rage, wondering why the local clergy went crazy every time he mentioned his new master. Fast forward to the moment he took a huge bite out of his sandwich. Even a legendary hero needed to eat while planning his next move. He sat on the bench, scrolling through his system windows. Life as a hidden-class carrier had definitely become a constant grind for Kaiser. He was the only one who could carry on the legacy of the legendary war god Cassiar. Cassiar was the legendary ruler of Avterdal, and a god so fearsome that even other deities trembled in his presence. The Kaiser continued his meal, reflecting on how the religious authorities probably saw Cassiar as the absolute embodiment of evil. Suddenly, our guy found himself caught up in the fray again, when a massive spiked mace came crashing down on him out of nowhere. Kaiser barely had time to process what was happening before the entire dungeon began to collapse right around him. His little goblin companion screamed for Lisa as he dodged the rain of swords that pierced the ground. The baby pointed towards the massive surge of energy and warned his master that something big was about to happen. A massive magic circle illuminated the entire area as the system window presented our protagonist with his greatest challenge. Kaiser had just learned that the war god Cassiar was awakening from his long-term seal, and now our guy had to hold out for 5 minutes against a living legend. This wasn't a mission he could take lightly. Facing the unknown, Kaiser prepared himself for the most dangerous encounter of his life, and also realized that he was fighting not a simple mob, and with the god of war. But he remained confident that surviving for 5 minutes was entirely within his power. Without hesitation, he called upon his power to materialize a glowing pink blade for the coming test. A confident smirk played on his lips as he prepared to endure the 5-minute survival test against the legendary god. His bravado was interrupted by a sudden sensation, as if heavy chains had wrapped around his entire body. Cold sweat ran down his face as the suffocating pressure made it impossible for him to even finish his sentence. Glowing blue chains materialized out of thin air to bind our hero and pin him in place. The god's heavy footsteps echoed throughout the room as Cassiar slowly closed the distance between them. Kaiser stood his ground, blade raised, watching as the massive god loomed over him with overwhelming power. Seeing his master completely paralyzed, the little goblin screamed in panic as he sensed a deadly change in the air. The full gravity of the situation finally hit him, and Kaiser wondered why everything had suddenly gone so wrong. He desperately tried to activate his heroic trait to survive, but the ability failed at the very moment he needed it most. Cassiar looked down coldly, his glowing red eyes signaling the start of a one-sided massacre. The system confirmed the ability had been deactivated. The god opened his mouth, preparing to crush the pathetic human who dared to enter his domain. The sheer lust for murder was enough to make Kaiser's entire body shake with uncontrollable terror. His little companion grabbed the spider and began to cry, fully convinced that his master was about to become a footnote in history. Anger began to boil within Kaiser as he refused to let a pile of digital data paralyze him with fear. He called upon his pride and prepared to fight. He let out a loud scream, asking the universe not to make him laugh if it thought he would just give up. The god of war actually paused for a moment, looking genuinely surprised that the human still had the courage to fight back. Kaiser unleashed a flurry of high-speed attacks on him, swinging his blade with the last of his strength. The wild glint returned to his eyes as he declared that no divinity could frighten him after all he had been through. The goblin noticed that his legs were shaking too much for someone who claimed to be afraid of nothing. The Kaiser snapped at his servant, shouting back that he was just trying to look cool while staring death in the face. For a moment, he tried to pull himself together, admitting that the skills he had acquired so far were actually quite useful. But he gripped his sword tighter and began to scream about how unfair it was of the god to take everything because of the failure of one quest. He continued his hysteria, complaining that he was the very person who had been cruelly cheated out of the quest rewards. The guy also understood that there was no point in whining about awards, but he still felt offended. Tears streamed down our guy's face as he asked Kaiser if he had any idea how much effort it took to get these items. The goblin and his spider friend looked on in disbelief, convinced that their master had finally broken under the pressure. Kaiser lamented the fact that his gaming life had finally begun to improve just before this disaster. The goblin stood there blankly and asked why his master was wasting his time chatting instead of actually fighting. Kaiser suddenly stopped crying and smirked, telling the god to be quiet because the timer was almost up. The goblin realized that this entire tirade was just a delaying tactic and praised his master for such a legendary cunning. Seeing his master take such a reckless step, the goblin screamed in absolute shock and despair. Kaiser ignored the danger and rushed forward with incredible speed to close the distance for his final blow. The warrior realized that his only way to victory was to strike successfully in the back while the enemy was distracted. He began to sweat, wondering if it was even possible for him to defeat a monster of such caliber. Desperate hope began to fill his mind as he imagined the legendary rewards that could await him. The system suddenly responded to his will and activated the backstab skill as he flew through the air. His entire plan instantly collapsed when the huge enemy smiled, and then he easily caught him by the throat right in the air. The Kaiser froze in pure horror as he saw that his most powerful attack had not left a single scratch on the enemy. The giant slammed him into the rocky floor with such incredible force that it created a huge explosion of debris. The goblin and the little spider were forced to watch in horror as their master was brutally trampled into the ground. Kaiser began to cough up blood, and his vision began to blur from the crushing grip on his neck. Kaiser was pinned to the ground, gasping for air as the creature watched from the side. His little goblin friend panicked and called for help as the situation became increasingly tense. Our guy thought that this was finally the end, and cursed his terrible luck for getting into this mess. This massive dude was looming over him with a smile that said he was about to do something crazy. The god raised his chained hand for an incredible blow, which would most likely be the hero's last. The Kaiser prepared for the worst when the pressure from the enemy became almost unbearable. However, the next second, Kaiser simply lowered his second hand onto Gigi's chest and loosened his grip on his neck. Things took a strange turn when his attacker began grabbing his face, poking his mouth, and tugging at his ears. This so-called martial arts god was literally stretching our protagonist's face, as if he were playing with a piece of dough. It turned out it wasn't a duel to the death, as the big guy was simply tickling him for fun. Even the goblin assistant had no idea how to react to this bizarre display of affection from his master. The martial arts god began licking his lips as if he had just found a new tasty snack to play with. This eerie behavior made it clear that the man our hero had encountered was a completely unpredictable madman. Our guy began to panic. The little creature looked as if its brain had just short-circuited from trying to comprehend what it had just seen. It explained that when the martial arts god acted like this, it meant he truly recognized the other person. Kaiser stood up with this incredibly smug and handsome face, making the previous horror seem like just a dream. The guy was smirking contentedly as he looked down at our completely exhausted protagonist. The goblin shouted to Kaiser that the master was asking if he was ready to inherit his legendary will. Our protagonist was left sitting in the dirt, trying to figure out how a massacre turned into a career offer. Kaiser began striking these amazing poses with his chains, glowing with divine energy. He told Kaiser that his will was finally strong enough to handle what was to come. The Kaiser looked at them with pure skepticism, because all this was going completely differently than it should in normal history. Instead of the path of an apostle, he embarked on the path of a successor. Kaiser gave him a giant thumbs up as our guy wondered if his life had really been just one big joke. He realized that the apostle's path had disappeared, and the goblin said that he would now be shown something special. This absolute madman began to reach into his pants, as if he was looking for something very important there. Kaiser looked like he was ready to call the police because this behavior was becoming too strange even for him. The big guy was digging around inside while our protagonist crawled back to get as far away as possible. A massive golden light began to emerge from beneath the man's clothes as he began to take out some kind of secret item. Our guy was screaming at the top of his lungs because he couldn't believe what he was seeing with his own eyes and was waiting to see what kind of monster was about to be shown to him. What emerged was a literal glowing rod of pure energy, pulled out from a place where it definitely shouldn't have been. The protagonist was going crazy and asking why on earth the legendary relic was kept in someone's pants. Kaiser simply stood there with a proud look, holding a massive black staff with red tips on each end. The little goblin and his spider friend simply watched the chaos unfold. Kaiser pointed a trembling finger and demanded to know why this powerful object had appeared from there. Our guy successfully retrieved the relic of Kaiser, the god of war, the Thousand Changes. Our guy stood there, completely stunned by what had just happened, clutching the hilt of his brand new legendary weapon. Kaiser just waved smugly and grinned, as if he hadn't just given him a game-changing relic. And our little goblin friend and the spider understood him, telling the main character that it was time for them to get going quickly. Suddenly, a massive purple magic circle began to glow right under their feet, and the situation for our protagonist became truly insane. Kaiser panicked and screamed because he had no idea where this random teleportation circle was trying to take them. Our little green friend literally begged his master to save him as the portal began to suck them into an unknown void. Finally, they emerged from the portal and found themselves in a massive, ancient temple under a bright and peaceful blue sky. The teleportation portal spat out our heroes high above the temple grounds, sending them plummeting to the hard stone floor below. The poor goblin was spinning on the ground, stars in his eyes and dizzy, trying to remember which way was up. A system notification appeared, confirming they had entered the City of Promises, known as Brion. The Kaiser took a deep breath and told his companion that at least this time they weren't in a literal hellscape. But his fleeting relief was cut short when he felt someone approaching them from the shadows of the overgrown temple ruins. A mysterious old man with a massive white beard emerged from the shadows of the temple ruins to greet the guests. Our guy remained on the ground while his goblin friend looked ready to either start a fight immediately or run for his life. Instinct kicked in, and Kaiser immediately drew his golden blade to show this mysterious stranger that he was not to be trifled with. Instead of resisting or getting angry, the old man simply fell to his knees and hit his head on the stone ground. He stated that he was waiting for a successor who would finally carry out the will of that same legendary figure from the old legends. The man introduced himself as Gamillion Adrian and said his family had been waiting for this moment since the dawn of time. He was a hidden NPC. The Kaiser looked absolutely fed up with what was going on, while his little companion was actually celebrating and giving a thumbs up to their crazy luck. A new quest, One Step to the Truth, launched, requiring our guy to listen to a secret story about humanity. Kaiser was surprised as it opened the way to the main plot. The protagonist recalled legends of past heroes and warriors who created this world. Even the adventurer King Barian had likely never encountered such a secret quest chain in his entire career. The main character was shocked that the quest actually appeared right now, and the old man asked if Kaiser had already met the god of martial arts, Lord Kaiser. The Kaiser remained silent and allowed the old man to explain the dark secrets of the past that had been buried for centuries. Humans were once far more powerful than they are now, possessing incredible potential in every conceivable category, holding one of the 5 great thrones. But just when they were about to finally establish themselves as the owners of this throne, a mysterious and powerful force invaded them. These hate-filled beings now commanded otherworldly forces and acted as supreme rulers of all things under the name of gods. Our little green friend couldn't believe his ears and screamed in shock that the gods were the real villains behind all of this. The Kaiser realized that his path now lay against the heavens themselves and ordered the goblin to shut up for at least a minute. It turned out the gods were merely cowards, fleeing the war known as Ragnarok, which had destroyed their own divine homes. They wanted to seize Abtarthel, and a long war for survival began. The devastation was total. A third of the world was reduced to ashes before one single man stepped forward to turn the tide. This legendary hero was the martial arts god Kaiser, who looked like he had crawled straight out of a nightmare to defend humanity from its divine oppressors. Returning to the present, the old man said that he had crushed the fourth mythical gods, and they thought that victory was near, until it broke out. The hatred and resentment of every soul that perished on the battlefield did not simply vanish, but merged into a terrifying darkness. This nightmare became known as the Abyss, a seething void of malice that threatened to devour all life. The place was so toxic that anyone who entered it, god or human, returned as something far more dangerous. They were no longer themselves. To prevent the world from completely dying out, the gods and humanity finally agreed to put their differences aside and make a desperate deal for survival. The gods agreed to a peace treaty with one grim condition. All of humanity was to be handed over to the rulers as a massive sacrifice. So the old man said that humanity had lost its potential and had become only slaves under the rule of the gods, and Kaiser was sealed. The gods began to call people otherworlders and turn them into their puppet apostles as soon as they entered this world. Kaiser had a hard time accepting the fact that he had been destined to be a human sacrifice from the very beginning of his journey in this world. Upon hearing of the divine conspiracy, the little goblin fell into total panic, realizing that they were up against absolute evil. The Kaiser took this revelation surprisingly calmly and began to plan his revenge on the divine entities. And for some reason, the goblin developed a bump on his head. He quietly thought about how much his master irritated him. Kaiser then went into a flashback when he decided to decline the system's offer to draw a card again, as he preferred to keep his current adventurer vessel. After defeating the demonic dragon and obtaining the Eye of Truth, his entire destiny was rewritten to lead him to absolute greatness. Back in the present, Kaiser laughed like a true maniac because he knew he was made of different stuff than anyone else who started with the Apostle's vessel. The old man began to tremble with genuine delight, realizing that he was in the presence of someone truly legendary. A sinister smile spread across Kaiser's face as he realized that he was about to turn the entire gaming world upside down. Our hero was ready to rewrite history and leave behind his days as a tough warrior to become a man of high society. Our guy was acting like an absolute menace to society, and even his little goblin companion was feeling genuinely creeped out by his behavior. Every step he took was now recorded in the legendary adventurer's book. He completed the class quest and took a giant step toward the truth. The main plot was activated. The old man was completely baffled by the incredible speed with which our protagonist was rising through the ranks of adventurers and gave him some more advice. The Kaiser noticed the fragments of fate and realized that these glowing red shards were the key to everything he needed to succeed. The mysterious figure of Kaiser, chained in gold, represented the original vessel that had been hidden for so long. Because the seal's power was too great, the vessel shattered into a million pieces, scattering across the map. Kaiser's message was clear. Only those who fulfill their destiny will ever be able to touch this ancient power. Our guy was told he had to track down every single fragment if he wanted to stand up to those hateful bastards. When Kaiser asked for more information, the old man simply played the secrecy card and said that he couldn't tell him anything, yet. Apparently, some of these fragments had recently been spotted in Brion, so that was where they were next to be searched. Our guy was on edge and demanded all the details, as he was ready for a large-scale treasure hunt for power. The old man responded with a cheerful expression to hide the fact that he was leading the protagonist into a deadly trap. He needed to kill 1,000 monsters. The Kaiser stopped dead in his tracks, wondering if he had misheard or if his own ears had played a cruel trick on him. But he literally could not refuse this task. There was a deathly silence all around as our guy tried to comprehend the trap he had just accidentally fallen into. Kaiser would have lost his class if he hadn't completed this quest within 60 hours. While Kaiser was having a total nervous breakdown, the old man simply stood next to him and prayed for him with an impassive face. Kaiser remembered the madman in chains and realized that this guy was crazy enough to create such impossible quest conditions. He realized that he had to kill someone every 3 minutes for 2 days straight just to survive this utter hell, and not the quest. The old man essentially wished him luck and said goodbye before Kaiser had time to grasp the reality of what was happening. The guy literally turned around and ran away like a sprinter, leaving Kaiser standing there in the dust and panic. Our guy was clutching his face in pure agony because this quest was practically a one-way ticket to total burnout. And the goblin asked Kaiser why they kept this vital information a secret until the very last second of their deal. Kaiser didn't understand, and the goblin explained that he was talking about that thick, long, and strong thing from Kazier's underwear. In the end, Kaiser simply raised 1,000 changes into the air and ordered the goblin to never describe the weapon like that again. The goblin didn't understand his mistake, and Kaiser sighed and decided to see what this strange black stick was really capable of. Suddenly, a notification popped up right in front of him, and he looked completely stunned by the text he read. The weapon began to glow like nothing he had ever seen during his 3 years of survival in Demrock. Our guy could hardly believe his luck and just stood there, swallowing nervously. He mentally ordered himself to remain calm and began to look through the hidden characteristics of this thing, which was capable of devouring other equipment and turning into what was eaten. The boy was faced with reality. The system told him his level was too low to fully utilize the gear. His stats were nerfed, but he knew this weapon would still make all the difference. Even with all the limitations, he knew it was possibly the most broken and overpowered item in the game. He eventually made his way to the Fish Rock Forest, where the atmosphere was thick with fog and danger. Deep in the forest, an archer took aim, focusing perfectly on his target. He released the arrow, and a massive beam of light slammed straight into an orc passing by. But the monster didn't even bat an eyelid and simply turned to him with pure fury in his gaze. This guy realized he had screwed up big time while the orc was getting ready to crush him into a pancake. The green beast rushed forward without the slightest hesitation, intending to crush everything in its path. Out of nowhere, a powerful explosion shook the monster's head and stopped it in its tracks. The monster definitely felt the blow, clutching its smoking head in wild pain. A muscular warrior with some rather funny ponytails on his head shouted at the beast, ordering it to lie down and not move, waving his staff. The other warrior had no time to bother with the orc and rushed into battle with a loud battle cry, swinging his blade with the last of his strength. He delivered a brutal, slashing blow that sent blood splattering across the dark forest floor. But the orc was far from finished. He delivered a crushing blow with his fist, which threw the warrior away like a rag doll. But this guy wasn't about to give up, and quickly jumped to his feet for one last desperate attack. He lunged forward and delivered a final crushing blow that cut right through the monster. Finally, the orc collapsed into the mud and let out a final groan before falling silent forever. The entire group gathered around the body, wondering out loud if they had really survived. The muscular warrior broke into a smile. He was clearly pleased with his performance against the beast and felt like a real hero. The archer joined in the fun, looking quite proud of their successful teamwork. Everyone started laughing together because they sincerely considered themselves the strongest in these parts. Meanwhile, Kaiser simply watched this whole circus from the shadows with a bored look. One of the warriors noticed him alone without a group, and these idiots thought that he was just trash, and even his equipment was so-so. Then they called him over, and our main character quickly turned to look at them. These gigachads approached him and asked, "Is he wandering around here alone?" The main character initially looked down at the strange question, and so he joked that yes, he is alone, because he doesn't have a girlfriend yet. The joke wasn't very good, but the main idiot jock started laughing anyway. And then all the other idiots joined in, and the laughter spread throughout the whole group of jocks. They continued to examine the protagonist and laughed out loud about his fate, clothes, weapons, and guard. But the laughter stopped instantly when another monster appeared from the darkness. And not just one, but 2 massive orcs surrounded the group and blocked their path forward. The Kaiser simply stood his ground, weapon at the ready, while the others began to realize that they were in serious trouble. The main character said that he just wanted to chat with them before the quest. Suddenly, this massive green beast leaped out of the shadows, its jaws wide open, ready to turn him into an easy snack. This creature was all muscle and fury. Instead of running, Kaiser tightened his grip on the handle, and the seemingly simple stick began to pulse with a blinding golden light. The energy was unleashed when our guy finally decided to stop playing along and show everyone what he was really capable of. Kaiser leaped high into the air and began literally slicing apart these monsters. He wasn't just fighting, he was savoring every second of the carnage. The frantic speed of his strikes left nothing but a trail of blood behind as he began his dance of death. Behind him, the entire group simply stood there with their jaws hanging open. The group's leader broke out in a cold sweat, realizing that he had just tried to command a literal monster in human form. Kaiser pulverized the massive monster with a single blow and turned to give his stunned teammates a smug grin, because he knew he was on a completely different level. The team of idiots watched from the sidelines. Their archer was covered in sweat and couldn't believe his eyes when he saw what had happened. The weapon was clearly a staff, but before his eyes it transformed into a sword. a sight the man had never expected. Was there such equipment in Gotos? But there was no time to think. Another ogre also rushed at the main character. The Kaiser immediately turned to face his new enemy, and he gripped the sword tighter, which glowed and began to transform again. The sword of 1,000 changes immediately transformed, taking on a new form. This time, the blade became an assassin's dagger. Futa from the group of idiots let out a shocked breath. The weapon changed again, turning into something else, and the main character immediately threw it at the ogre, piercing the monster's chest with the magic dagger. New types of weapons continued to appear one after another, and this spectacle caused bewilderment among others. No one expected such a powerful blow from one hit either. The ogre died immediately, and Kaiser raised his magic hand with a smile, pleased with his result. The dagger literally flew out of the ogre's chest, and it returned to the protagonist's hands. It was quite a spectacle. It seemed completely absurd. It wasn't Thor's hammer, after all. The idiots stood there and wondered what it was. A property of the weapon or a unique ability of the guy? They stared at him tensely, and our protagonist noticed it. And then he tried to joke that they were going to kill them first, but due to excessive excitement, the hunter accidentally killed 2 of them at once. Another member of the squad quickly waved it off, declaring that they had caught enough already, and laughed unnaturally. Then Kaiser again assumed his usual emotionless face, and said that he understood everything. In response, only an inarticulate moan was heard. 2 more orcs clearly had no intention of engaging in conversation. The monster let out a guttural roar, and our protagonist was already twirling the new form of the staff. And taking a stance, Kaiser defiantly asked if he should take down about 100 of these creatures right now. The scene suddenly changed, and we saw an entire field strewn with the corpses of green monsters. He still felt that this was not enough, and he wondered if more orcs would appear. A glance slid around. There wasn't a soul around, which also seemed odd. The goblin said the master had already mowed down all the orcs, so the other players had simply gone elsewhere. The guy himself couldn't believe that a loser like him could single-handedly exterminate all the greenies. After all, there were squads of them with insane stats gathered nearby. He mocked them. It seemed the orcs had begun to realize the threat posed by the master, and were now fleeing deeper into the forest. The man chuckled. They perceived his body as a predator, and this was understandable. He could physically feel his stats soar after the Raven release quest. The screen displayed the titles he'd earned: First S-rank graduate and heir to Cassiar's will. Moreover, the reward weapon turned out to be far more powerful than expected. The equipment was called the Raven Trial Set, and included the Black Raven Spear and earrings. The hero suggested taking his time now, since other people also needed to hunt, and he exhaled with relief. He was about to leave, but suddenly stopped in indecision. Why on earth should he do this at all? The goblin noticed what kind of character the master had, and the guy said that he should try it himself. And 1,000 changes immediately transformed into the Black Raven Spear. And then, rushing forward, he advised his companion to try to graduate with an S rank himself. An unintelligible guttural cry full of rage was heard, and the guy jumped into the orcs, immediately cutting down 3 of them. And then he dashed forward, literally becoming a deadly whirlwind, cutting through the monsters around him. The guy was simply furious. He already had 127 killed scum under his belt. He screamed and demanded the death of all these monsters, and for a moment, his kill count increased to 35. The system counter has been updated. Monsters defeated near Brion, 249 out of 1,000. And with a sinister laugh, he caught up with another one, asking where he was going to run. However, they stopped because the screen warned that there were 3 minutes left before logging out. Kaiser thought that time was running out, and it seemed time to wrap things up. The orc thought that his life was probably saved, and he breathed a sigh of relief. However, the guy said thoughtfully that he didn't know what to do. He decided to catch one more and reach the 250 mark. The monster let out a strangled wheeze, and at that very moment, the protagonist's eyes of truth activated. The hero stopped again and looked up in surprise. What the hell was that? The goblin didn't make it in time and fell to the ground. The guard irritably noted that he was too distracted and advised him to focus on one thing. The boy asked him to wait and freeze for at least a second. He pointed to a reddish glow emanating from the top of a nearby mountain. As we got closer, we could see huge bloody rocks. But the goblin saw nothing and asked in bewilderment what was there. The man insisted that if this place was the only one that was glowing, then there was definitely something important there. They approached the light in an instant, but the goblin still didn't understand. What was that even there? The eyes of truth were activated for the first time in a long time, and the boy was sure that there was definitely something there. A hunch crossed his mind. Was this a fragment of fate? He tried to grasp the light with his hand, but as soon as the stone left a burn on his hand, he cried out, and the system reported that the quest item Ominous Energy had been found, and a new task was being created. The boy was surprised, as he'd already extracted plenty of such energies during the jihad. An indignant shout responded. "What did you say, upstart?" The system has again reported the discovery of malevolent energy in the Bryan Forest. Something unusually sinister is sensing. Rare rank, quest item. High Priest Giloiti of the Temple of Lyra might know the nature of this discovery. The boy thought the quest item had dropped here completely unexpectedly, and noted with regret that the find wasn't a fragment of fate. But even this looked like it would make a decent reward. There were 10 seconds left until the system logout. The man was surprised. Was it really time already? The goblin was indignant that he was leaving right now. Kaiser did not understand the reason for this reaction and asked if there were any problems. The answer was that the goblin didn't know what to do without a master, and what would happen to Eliza? But the system did not let him finish and notified him of the transfer to the guard room. It turned out to be the guard's waiting area, and the goblin was already standing there, completely alone. According to the rules, each guard was entitled to a separate room where he could remain without threats until the owner returned. The goblin admitted that this was only his second time here, so he felt uneasy. Compared to the outside world, it was quiet and peaceful. He had just reunited with Eliza after 150 years, but hadn't had time to properly ask how she was doing. Since this was the spider's first visit to the guardian's room, the goblin was worried that she might get lost there alone, and asked when the owner would return. He was eager to stroke Eliza's fluffy fur, since he hadn't been able to play with her because he was cleaning up after the master. He dreamed of sleeping, touching soft Eliza, but immediately became wary when he saw a house in the middle of the forest. The goblin was surprised to notice something in the guard's room that had not been there before. The house looked exactly like the cabin he had once lived in. The sight of it brought back old memories. Opening the door, his tired, green goblin gaze fell inside. Inside, everything was the same as before, but there was one thing, a small spider right on his desk. And then both creatures joyfully greeted each other, shouting out names, Lisa and Eliza. Finally, the scene moved back to the protagonist's real home. Kaiser emerged from the capsule and wished he had hurried a little more so that he could have met his quota of 250 kills. Suddenly, the guy smelled an appetizing smell coming from somewhere in the kitchen. When he entered the room, his younger sister Hyuna appeared in front of him with delicious ramen. He came up and tried to talk to him, but the girl immediately refused to give him food and told him to get away. The guy then simply stood in front of her with a calm, understanding face, but almost beaming. He shouted, and 1,000 changes immediately transformed into shining steel chopsticks. Kaiser prepared for battle, calling his opponent an orc addicted to poison. He noted with annoyance that this orc was turning out to be quite a tough nut to crack. The girl quipped, saying that even slugs could talk now. Hyuna advised her brother to live in reality. Since he's not good at the game, why act like a fool? Kaiser was indignant, asking if she had even seen him play, and if she had even heard about the main quest. The sister asked if he had already joined any guild. The guy replied that no, and that he doesn't even plan to do so yet. The girl smiled, noticing that even the scouts hadn't come to see him. Kaiser didn't care. He would still be #1 in the rankings. My sister countered that he wasn't in the top 10 guilds and wasn't as handsome as Burrs. Besides, he didn't have 100 million views on YouTube. How did he even plan to become first? The guy got angry and told me to just wait until he finally succeeded. He left, and Hyuna was surprised by such sudden self-confidence. But deciding that everything was over, she returned to her dish. However, a second later, he returned to eat more food, and Hyuna sharply asked if he wanted to die. Soon the scene moved again. The main character was already sitting at the computer. The Kaiser replied that he would show his worth if provoked. The man decided to quickly review the footage and post the video according to current YouTube trends. The screen displayed the God of Savior channel with recent videos and live broadcasts. The guy was surprised. There was a video of himself there titled Kaiser Has Returned. The Legend of Demrock video has gained 1,080,000 views in 10 hours. It turned out that while Kaiser was carefree and rampaging, the entire world of God of Savior began to tremble. At the entrance to Brionne, someone doubted whether this was truly the legendary Kaiser from Demrock. Another person confirmed that if he had achieved an S rank on the Raven release quest, then it was definitely him. But why had no one seen him? They said he'd already entered the rocky forest. The rumor spread further and further. In a gloomy stone forest, one of the players asked the leader if he was sure Kaiser was there. The commander confirmed, citing screenshots of the hunt. But something's wrong here. Kaiser hasn't been close to the guilds before. Maybe he sensed the scouts and has already fled? They could only sigh. It looked like that was it. They were expecting to at least see his face. One of the hunters clucked his tongue in annoyance, hoping to make money off this. The scouts began to move. The Baektugan Guild was surprised that Kaiser had ignored all the scout suggestions. Xinyan noted that without a guild, the game's capabilities were limited and questioned the young man's sanity. Rumors also leaked that Kaiser had issued a challenge to every guild. The Heroes Guild logo and its leader flashed on the screen. However, things wouldn't be easy in Brion. The named guilds began to respond. In the comments, users admired Kaiser. Some wrote that guilds are only for weaklings. Others called his acts legendary and believed in it, and still others said that he would crush the corrupt guilds. Rumors instantly gained momentum in the community and blew up to incredible proportions. Kaiser wondered when he'd ever look down on guilds, but he immediately admitted there was something to it. In any case, the time was right. While all eyes were on him, the man decided to jot down something without bothering with editing. He clicked the upload button. As he lay down on the bed, the guy chuckled contentedly, hoping to attract a fair amount of attention. He wondered how many views he'd need to make his first profit. The question came to mind about which Ferrari model was currently in fashion, but he immediately remembered that he didn't have a license. Soon morning came, and the main character finally got up. The first thing he did was take out his phone and with trembling hands begin to check the statistics. Kaiser TV, a channel with 794,000 subscribers, posted a video of a hunt at a hidden raven field that garnered 3.4 million views in one day. Viewers wrote that they were watching the video for the 12th time and never got tired of it. Others were amazed by the Korean player's performance, and fans demanded a new video. They even opened a fan cafe, inviting everyone. Kaiser couldn't believe his eyes when he looked at his own channel. Soon, a satisfied grin spread across his face. He finally did it! He shouted joyfully, showing the results to Sister Hyuna and admiring his own greatness. But then he got hit on the head with a ladle and became embarrassed. His mother yelled at him not to make noise early in the morning and told him to just have breakfast. The boy cursed and asked where Hyuna was. They told him she must have gone to school since it was Friday. He repeated it, confused. His mother asked again if he was going to eat. Kaiser promised to buy meat later and approached his capsule again. A message appeared on the screen indicating he was connecting to God of Savior. The system welcomed him to a paradise of adventure. The guy was going to work hard and post another video, but he doubted whether he could really become world-class so quickly. Notifications reported an increase in Jihad Black's loyalty and level, as well as the awakening of Eliza's guardian due to his growth. Kaiser was taken aback by the flood of windows that popped up at the entrance. He didn't understand what awakening meant. Jihad greeted him with a grin, noticing that his master had quickly returned. The boy glanced at the goblin. He turned out to be a surprisingly self-assured fellow. He was indignant at the relationship between them. The Kaiser noticed that the goblin seemed to have changed, to which he jokingly asked if he had looked better in the guard's room. The man denied he was joking, but the guard responded in kind. The hero was surprised by Eliza's color change, wondering if it was related to her awakening. Moreover, the spider had acquired a necklace. The goblin explained that in the guard's room, Eliza's body began to glow and change color, and they found her favorite necklace there. Kaiser asked again about their room. Aren't they usually separate? And what do you mean found? The goblin began to justify himself, saying it just happened. He suggested it was a gift for a good life. The boy was outraged at how Eliza was susceptible to the influence of this insignificant goblin. The guardian exclaimed indignantly, "What's wrong with him?" But they were distracted by conversations from the sidelines. Passers-by recognized Kaiser. Judging by the characteristically brazen pose, there was no doubt. They noticed a scowling goblin nearby and turned to the Kaiser, delighted by the meeting. The protagonist was not particularly pleased with this meeting. Players begged him to join their emergency guild, promising better conditions. The Bangtang Knights Guild introduced itself as being created especially for him. Everyone advised grabbing Kaiser first before he escaped again. Someone was upset at being pushed and demanded they not cut in line. Jihad, confused, asked what was going on. Kaiser sighed. One video had caught his attention, and now these flies had flocked to him. He lamented that he couldn't do anything about it. He attributed it all to his fatal irresistibility. He condescendingly offered to take a photo as a souvenir, as with the first star, and take a number in line. Someone was surprised by this trick. Another player shouted that Kaiser wasn't yet at a high enough level and urged everyone to simply grab him. The Kaiser chuckled. That hadn't worked. He already had his staff in his hands. And after thinking about it, the boy realized something. Jungbyun transformed into the silver iron shield, and the hero took a pose with him and declared that he would not let him take a photo. He swung it sharply, gritting his teeth. And then he said that the reason for the refusal was simple. The man had rights to the image. Someone from the crowd shouted indignantly, wondering what they had thrown at him. A battle cry rang out, but the incoming shell immediately scattered all the idiots. Shields were now strewn across the floor, and someone even made a remark about brute force. The Kaiser ordered Jihad and Eliza to flee. The goblin was at a loss, realizing that if they lost their master, it would be all over. So they all rushed forward together. Their pursuers also hurried. They needed to catch Kaiser in time. The guy cursed. As soon as he became famous, all sorts of small fry surrounded him from all sides. Someone from the crowd in front recognized Kaiser again and was glad that he had finally appeared. The goblin told the master that at this rate, they would simply be crushed by fans and guilds. The protagonist understood this too, so he asked the goblin to just wait. He immediately raised his hand and activated the summoning. The shield began to move, and just a moment later, he was returning to him at insane speed. With one deft movement, Kaiser grabbed his shield as he ran, and then, swinging it very hard, he politely asked to clear the way. And then he warned that it was better not to tempt fate if you didn't want to die. The shield immediately headed into the crowd of onlookers. The scene suddenly changed and moved to the city. The crowd whispered admiringly. It really was Kaiser. They wondered if he was with a companion or a guardian. Someone suggested asking on the Gotos forums. A representative of the Little Star Guild tried to invite the boy over, but was briefly refused. Kaiser noted that the city is still much calmer than the hunting grounds. Violence or murder within the city limits immediately landed someone behind bars, so the aggressors had to restrain themselves. The man could clearly see how these guys could barely contain themselves, and imagined how great the temptation would be. The former legend appeared in the guise of a low-level newbie who had only been playing for 4 days. The enemies probably wanted to kill Kaiser for glory. Now he had a compelling reason to reach max level faster. Until then, he should have kept a low profile and kept a low profile. The hero was about to behave quietly, but Jihad decided otherwise and loudly declared who he was. Those around asked again, "Gee, what?" Someone mentioned groundwater and Lisa. The goblin introduced himself as the guardian of the great Kaiser, and also introduced Eliza and asked her to remember his name. But the next second he was interrupted. The main character quickly pulled him away from the crowd. The Kaiser was outraged, calling him crazy. They had already attracted enough attention, why more? The keeper objected that the owner had become famous, and no one knew his guards. So he simply decided to introduce himself properly. The guy told the little goblin to shut up because they didn't even have time for quests, and told him to stop his useless antics. Soon, a name appeared on the screen: the Great Temple of Lyra. They arrived at the location. Kaiser admitted that he felt an inexplicable nervousness in this location. He doubted whether he should go inside at all, but he continued walking anyway. At the entrance, the guard politely asked how he could help. The boy timidly replied that he wanted to see the high priest Gilpeti, but instead of an answer, he saw how someone was already poking a sharp iron spear into his face. The guards were outraged by such impudence. How could one so carelessly throw around the name of a high priest? The hero defended himself by saying he was merely asking. Jihad stood up for his master, shouting at who dared point a weapon at him. But after a spear in the face, he immediately added that in general, the master could have handled it himself. Kaiser called him a useless asshole and opened his inventory, asking for a second of his attention. He explained that he came here to show me this. A box immediately appeared in his hands, and he threw it into the hands of the stupid guard, who looked at it carefully and then opened it. They asked no more questions and let Kaiser in. The man noted that security there was very strict. The other priests led him to the door and let him through, telling him to walk slowly through the door into the hall, warning the Kaiser to be especially careful about his words and actions in front of the high priest. The Kaiser was reminded to be careful in the presence of the high priest, and he replied that he understood. It felt like he'd done something wrong for no reason. But the protagonist went inside anyway. And seeing the people on the throne and nearby, I noticed a tense atmosphere. They looked very serious. It looked like it was difficult to even talk to these people, so the Kaiser even started sweating. Finally, Zerdik, standing on the right, asked again what it was. Kaiser was confused when he saw that the tag with his interlocutor's name was glowing red. The priest coldly remarked that since the guest had arrived, it would be appropriate to begin with an introduction. The boy immediately apologized and introduced himself as Kaiser. The guard barked angrily, ordering him to speak louder and clearer. Another servant intervened and asked Zerdik to stop. The main character didn't understand the problem. Then Toxinel explained that his friend was from faraway lands, so he spoke a little rudely. He asked for understanding and forgiveness for his guest. Kaiser noticed that this guy also had a red tag, and realized that if he carelessly touched them, he could get into big trouble. Then he put on a simple face and replied that he was just a little surprised, but everything was fine. Finally, the high priest approached them and noticed that the boy had come a long way to get here. He added that he had heard that he had brought the same thing with him. The Kaiser nodded and took out the object, holding it out in plain sight. Inside the box was simply a black piece of stone. The priest confirmed that it was indeed it and touched it with his robe. Taking it in his hands, he began to examine it for a long time from all sides. Then he asked the guy if he even knew what it was. The Kaiser, confused, replied that he had no idea how he should know, and he replied that he didn't. Zerdik was outraged. How could someone drag something like that here without even knowing what it was? The boy defended himself. He was simply in the bloody rocky forest and found the thing on a rock. The guard shouted back that such a thing could not be found on a stone without reason, and asked if he was a cleric. Toxinel immediately asked his partner to calm down and apologized, saying he was a good guy, but his words were a bit harsh. Gigi countered that the problem wasn't just with words, but the elder brother told him not to doubt this man. The younger priest was indignant that the high priest was being called bro, as if he were the boy next door. Then the high priest, still holding the stone, laughed and admitted that they had behaved impolitely. He remarked that he had thought the guest a mere stranger, but it seemed he belonged to a higher rank. The title of best graduate responded, and the priest confirmed that such a distinguished guest was more than worthy of discovering this artifact. He then promised to explain the true nature of this object. It was about the most sinister energy in all of Avtartel, which was called the Trace of Fear. The worst and most malevolent entity, horror of the dungeons. All these names referred to the traces left by this very thing. The priest said they called it by a specific word, the abyss. The aura around them thickened again, and the protagonist also tensed at that one word. The aura around them turned downright bloody.